Welcome, everybody, to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. I hope that you are doing all right on this Friday morning where I am, Friday morning where Carlos is, and I don't know what it is where you are, but it's good to be with you all. I'm excited for this conversation. Looking forward to it. I know that a lot of folks have been following the streams of Deculturation. I just started to pay attention to this a little bit ago. I know that he's worked with our friend Jared Ball over on I Mix What I Like, and some other folks, but I think performs a valuable public service, and we'll get into that and more, as well as like just a bunch of stuff. So yeah, this is going to be like, I think, a little bit more informal than some of the conversations that we have, just because I'm sure, you know, I'm not going to do a big introduction because I don't actually have all the biographical details, and we could maybe talk about a little bit of that. Um, but I'm super happy to be doing this and sharing it. So please, of course, take a minute, basic things, right? Like the video to help us, with the algorithm and everything else. Subscribe to the channel if you are not already. You could support the Patreon. Would love that, of course. And most importantly, share it with folks, right? Bring other people into these conversations. So, deculturation. Is that what should I call you deculturate? So we were joking
What?
about this beforehand
Yeah.
because I was, you were like, I don't know about the handle of deculturation being in the picture or whatever. And I love the name. I said I joked to you probably because I grew up in the early 80s and just was raised in the 90s, which is probably one of the low points of humanity and culture. But nonetheless, like, grew up listening to a lot of hip hop, and so it reminds me a lot of like an MC name, or even kind of a battle rapper name. And I think actually that fits quite well with how you engage this media space too, as somebody willing to debate, but also somebody willing to criticize people who many people think of as on the left, and some people think of as far left, actually, if you talk to, kind of mainstream folks, or certainly conservatives, right? Um, but yeah, so I maybe to start, actually, I know we're not going to do a deep bio, but maybe you want to say a little bit just about yourself,
Yeah.
and even the name. I think like it'd be the word, when I looked it up, I hadn't really been super familiar with it, but it has an interesting like context to it too. And so I'd be interested in that as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on, honestly. I mentioned to you privately that millennials are killing capitalism and Why is the Dome TV are like my go-to for great interviews. And I told you, I'm like, look, I can't bring the type of academic, background knowledge and accolades that your other guests have. And to your credit, you kind of made me feel more comfortable because what I do bring is kind of that shit talking approach. Because I think that a lot of this propaganda that we're being pushed to be called, left, is too blatant. And even if someone like me can call it out and recognize it for what it is, then I don't think you need credentials. I mean, we're at this point where a tongue cough, a death call tattoo doesn't make you a Nazi anymore. So, and this is all from the political commentator class. So honestly, like, if anyone wants to do this, let me be the example that anyone can do it. um as for my like personal aspect, the background, I try to limit like the parasocial stuff, um because I've seen a lot of like creepy behavior. I criticized Spat Empanada recently, and like people were like legit saying that they were gonna like look up my exes. They were saying that he sent him, like, and it was just like, bro, like, are you not like an adult? Or I mean, a lot of these people aren't, unfortunately. So I try to limit that. But recently I revealed that, yeah, I'm first generation. I'm a blue collar worker, union organizer. I volunteered, work with kids in immigration. And I always tell people, like, I understand like a lot of like these nonprofit, industrial complex and everything, but do something. If there's not an organization around you, if there's not an organization you feel comfortable with, do something. And at the end of the day, those kids or whoever you decide to help, whether it's even like, you know, handing out food or whatnot, the people that you're helping don't give a damn about, your politics, your ideology, how far left are you. They're hungry, they're in need, something. And I think we have an obligation to put our ego aside sometimes and do the work. I've been struggling with that recently in terms of finding a political organization that I'm comfortable with. Um, man, the DSA over here out in LA like keeps making it more and more difficult, especially with their compromise. Instead of holding firm with no Olympics, they've been compromising with that. But at the same time, I've seen it with my union work. They're out there, helping pass and push legislation that people don't really talk about, but make a difference when it comes to somebody's check and their security and housing and food. So again, it's balancing that ego of being realistic of where we're at. We have no vanguard party right now, and that's partly all of our faults, and we have to hold ourselves accountable to that. So, what does it mean to use this mic, run your mouth, but not do the work? And I want to make sure that I'm always doing the work. And the union stuff is cool and everything. We talked about this privately, but at the end of the day, it's never going to be any form of radical politics. It just isn't, at least in the foreseeable future. So I want to do something that's a little bit more to the left. Although I don't mind doing the practical work, it's always funny to me when people, you know, the criticism that you're not being practical, that you're not being realistic. I'm out there collecting signatures sometimes just for like a minimum wage increase. And it's so disheartening. And it's that practical work that radicalized me. It's the practical work that makes me realize that we need to do more. And so, like, I try to do much as I can, but we could always do more collectively. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't really feel comfortable talking about myself in general, but I think it's a very basic story. Very basic story for a generation, young parents, working class background. I spent 5 years in community college because I had no idea what I wanted to do while working. I have student debt, all this stuff. And I'm just really grateful and fortunate because while there might be some details of my childhood that would surprise some people or some people might have find difficult, I have family still, you know, across the border that, man, the way that they were forced to live and, spending time there, again, relatable. Shower bucket, taking showers with buckets, heating up the water, all that stuff. I have the privilege and benefit to see how they grew up, and that's again part of the thing that fuels me to push for more. Is that there's absolutely no reason why people should be struggling like that. And like, sure enough, drug addiction, alcoholism, it's an unfortunate go-to that I've seen, and it's a big part why I don't talk about my personal life because I'm like, let's just leave it there. Yeah, but I appreciate, the opportunity, and we're gonna talk some shit about liberals, so I'm excited.
Always excited. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, thank you for sharing, what you did. And I also totally respect the desire not to sort of overshare or, get too into, because I mean, in my own way, I try to do the same thing in terms of like avoiding, you know, one, I never want people to think of me as like people call me an organizer sometimes, and I'm like, please, like, don't do that. Like, there are real people who actually do that work at, like, I'm a guy who mostly talks to people on YouTube, and before that, in on audio podcasts, read a lot of books. Probably the most politically meaningful thing that I do with a lot of people is bring people together to read stuff together, and they can make those connections with each other, right? And figure out, oh, this person's over there. I like what they're doing. What party are they involved in or organization they involved, so like I see myself as kind of you know, a connector
Mm,
and stuff like that at its best, right? Which is not to say that, like you, I think that we can all, everybody benefits from good analysis, from good criticism, and there's lots of different avenues we can take to bring that forward. Um, So I wanted to talk though about like how you got into what you do in your streams, right? Like the just this point of maybe you could just tell that story a little bit and like even if it's evolved a little bit over time, like what are the ways that what drew you to start it and kind of how has it shifted for you over time?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I try to keep the personal, but it's been trickling out. And a good example of how I think parallels between starting streaming and just I guess starting that process of going to the left was acquiring the knowledge right in school and meeting the right people. And I remember being asked by somebody who I knew since first grade, like, what happened to you? Because we hadn't seen each other in so long. Mind you, I had just gotten off work and I crashed an after party for a wedding and they were already drunk. So I'm like, I'm not going to really engage with you and waste my time to explain. You're not going to remember this. There's no point. I'm tired. I just came here to like, you know, not a commitment. But I started to think, I'm like, damn, why have I like leaned so heavy into the left? Because my process was a little bit different. I did start with like really being curious about propaganda. So like Bernays and that aspect of it. Because growing up, I loved like watching TV. Like I was just obsessed with television. And then I had to like unlearn a lot of shit because of that. And from there was like decolonial thought with like Fanon, right? And then I found like Marx and Lenin and all that stuff, which still to me is like the more difficult homework opposed to the fun stuff about like decolonization and imperialism, which is as difficult as it can be and honestly like traumatizing to read this stuff. Um, that's what I'm most interested in. And it hit me that I'm like, oh shoot, it was because of you know the state of in terms of immigration. I'm first generation, so my family got temporarily split up because of trying to fix papers and get that legal citizen status going. And I'm like, oh, okay, so like I have something in me that's like it's really angry and upset and takes this very personal. And even then, I was lucky in so many ways. Even in that situation, I was very very fortunate. And so the streaming aspect of it, it also became personal because as I got older, kind of get a little bit complacent and you start listening to what's readily available. And so I did listen to Michael Brooks. I did listen to the Majority Report and a little bit of TYT, but it was a little too formal, but whatever. And then slowly I start seeing like younger people come up, Hasan Piker, the Vanguard, people that I could like relate to age wise. And I started being more like critical because I'm like, wait, the people that I'm around are not this liberal, are they're further to the left. And so why are these people like blowing up? And because of that, it was during I'm blanking out on the year, but it was Marianne Williamson was running for president, which was like essentially a book tour. And everyone was like super excited for her. I don't understand why. She was like legit Hollywood, Oprah's guru. And look, some of the most racist people are these like hippy dippy, culty, spiritual white women specifically. Like they're scary, right? Because they think that they have their everything aligned and their light is glowing, and then they're like justifying some of the most grotesque things, simple stuff like gentrification or just discrimination. And sure enough, you come to find out that she's a Zionist, like through and through, she is a Zionist. And yet, people on the left, again, Hassan, the Vanguard, Brianna Joy Gray, um, breaking points with Crystal Ball, like are like supporting her and pushing her forward. And I'm like, there is no reason to do this when she has no political experience. She's not going to win. This is very clearly some type of marketing strategy. Why are you defending a Zionist? It makes no sense to me. And out of that frustration of seeing the normalization of liberal Zionism, I was like, let me get a mic, let me get a camera, let me do something. And fortunately, like when you're working class and you get lucky, let's put it that way. I got lucky and receive an unexpected donation, and with that money, I was able to to buy the setup. And I mean, I still have to use a credit card, still got in debt and all that, but I was like, let me get something going because I'm not seeing anyone critique this from the left. Mind you, there are voices critiquing uh, Zionism, liberal Zionism for sure. That's always been there. But this specific space is not being criticized. It's kind of being ignored. And I know for a fact that's a space that a lot of young people who are interested in left politics are going to. Respectfully, young people are not going to millennials. They're not going to Black liberation media. They're not, because that's not what's being pushed, right? And so if I could talk shit about them in a manner that I think is somewhat valuable and being critical, and I always talk about being principally critical because we don't have to lie. They consistently lie and misinterpret things. We don't have to do that, because when the truth and the facts are on your side, you don't have to add any extra sauce to it. You just talk about it. You expose it for what it is. And sure enough, I was like, yeah, if nobody else is putting them on their titles to criticize them from the left, I'll do it. And I did something right, because I mean, I was even critical of FD Signifier, and he hit me up and he's like, let's talk about it, because he felt that my criticism was legitimate. And he saw me in these spaces that normally a lot of these like white YouTubers, I call them like Wonder Bread Tube, aren't in. And I think that also speaks says a lot. It says a lot that these people are consistently in liberal spaces and not bringing up leftist voices when it doesn't suit them or benefit them. They'll do it when they need a little bit of like legitimacy, right? They'll do it to get and gain like some type of like street credit or organizing credit, but they're not consistently engaging in it because it doesn't benefit them financially. It doesn't benefit them, for the views and clicks. So I'm trying to like figure out still how to do that balancing act of, hey, let's criticize them, while at the same time try and do, something that you and Black Liberation Media do, where you're actually engaging with the readings and stuff like that. Right now I'm working on a video on Graham Plattner. So we've been watching a lot of like videos and liberals, like just making fun of liberals. And I miss doing like the reading of the articles. Last week we were reading on Mamdani and Jessica Tish. I didn't know Jessica Tish's family owns a biblical zoo in the Zionist entity. Like nobody's talking about that. And I'm like, well, why not? Like, yeah, she's awful as an NYPD commissioner, but like this goes further than that. And the fact that he's keeping her on says so much about his willingness to work with Zionists. I mean, he said himself. But yeah, we can get to that in a bit. But it started just because out of frustration of like, man, nobody's talking. These people think they're the furthest left. Like these people are wagging their fingers to the people to the right. If you look at something like Majority Report, their biggest videos are talking shit about Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, Dave Rubin, all the typical characters, even, Bill Maher. Why is nobody talking about them and the normalization that they're doing, that they're engaging in? I don't understand it. So I'm like, all right, let me do it.
Well, first of all, I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I said I would say a little bit about my own orientation towards these people, right? Because I mean, for many of these folks, honestly, I've never engaged with this media sphere. Like, and it's interesting, like watching your show is funny to me. The one caveat is I have watched Hasan, because his streams can be funny and like, sometimes he really goes in on certain things. I appreciate all of your criticisms of him and I don't disagree, right? I'm not saying that. And also when he fucking shocked his dog on the air, I was like, what the fuck is wrong with this dude? But the but like leaving him aside a second, because I only mentioned him because he is the one that I have watched his stuff. I've never watched Majority Report or Seder or any of these folks, and I was always aware of their existence, but I saw them primarily, and I still do, as folks that to some extent rode Bernie's coattails into their positions. And on another extent, obviously they already had platforms or some kind of, whatever. They had something when that came along, right? Because they were positioned in a place where they could do that also. And I have a lot of people that I respect that that do watch it, and I think kind of for the same reason that you mentioned, I think you said Jared Ball says this as well, is like that's as far right as I can go to get my news or something like that, you know? And I understand that sentiment, right? Because they do have, they're going to be critical of a lot of stuff. They're going to point out certain contradictions, within the normie media sphere, the kind of, mainstream corporate. But having said that, like I I have a strong issue with social democratic politics. Like I think that actually it is fundamentally a strategy for preserving capitalism and getting a greater share for the so-called working class, but of the North, essentially, right? So to me, it is an imperialist form, or and certainly a capitalist form of politics. It's just one that says things should be more equitably distributed between the workers within empire and the ruling class within empire. And on some level, like there are aspects of those politics that I'm not against, right? Like I think that, you know, when you talk about like internal colonies within the core, or you talk about people who are just really low wage, people who are just like don't have health care, like things like that, like it's just really absurd. And I do think that, I agree with efforts to try to fight for those things for people, because also, most of the people that are impacted by those fights are more marginalized within our society than I am too, right? So it would be, I think, disingenuous for me, to say, oh, well, you shouldn't have something that I have access to, Um, but ultimately, and like a good example of this, we had a conversation with Torkel Lawson from like, I don't even know, 2018, 2019, 2020, somewhere in there. And he wrote a book about like the Nordic model and Sweden, basically, that, again, is that's the model for these folks, right? The model is like, we want to create Denmark in the United States, or we want, like, why can't we have Norway or Sweden, right? Like that. And like on one end, I mean, those states, they're internally repressive, like they have strong anti-immigrant sentiments. They have the whole like, they're based very often on a kind of like close to Nazi vision of like the Ehrenfolk and this kind of idea, right? Of like these people whose heritage belongs to this area are who the real citizenry is, and that kind of stuff. So there's all of that, but there's also that they can only function the way that they do because they have a role within empire, right? And you can't think of empire as just one country, right? And so any European country, like, yes, they have better shit, like no doubt about a lot of that, right? But there's like a kind of two-pronged context. I think that's always important to understand that. One, like communist movements were a lot stronger in Europe. And so the types of compromises that need to be done with their ruling classes and the workers there were much more significant, right? They had to actually say, okay, we will give you this. We will give you this. Like, just, we're not doing communism, right, guys? Like, you have to agree with us on this, right? And then on the flip side of that, they, you know, imperialism as a system of monopoly capitalism, right? Like they fully participate in it, right? And there's a lot of the stuff that Lawson shows in his book from, their own participation in the slave trade, right? Through the building of ships or the building of even like irons to lock enslaved people up and all that stuff, right? Was there. But also, like, if you look at more recent stuff, like some of the car companies and things like that up there, they end up outsourcing a lot of the labor to like Africa or other places like that. And so, you know, it's a part of the system. And so, one, I think it's also misguided to think that here in the like core of the core, that our ruling class is ever going to make that sort of compromise with us, but also is certainly not going to make that sort of compromise with like some kind of left liberal, like, mealy mouthed, project. And even if you believed that, you would have to have such an overwhelming kind of majority of these houses of power to get that sort of compromise. And that's not even to get to then, like, what are you selling out and what does that mean globally? I mean, I think it would mean a more durable, sustainable empire, which is actually why I think that there are certain elements within the ruling class that actually promote these forms of politics as well, right? I mean, the Zionism piece is really interesting, and I think because so our orientation with millennials was always like, we just want to do something different than that, right? It's like we want to have conversations with people who are thinking very clearly about anti-imperialist and anti-colonial politics, because we were clear that they really weren't serious about that. Like anything that they brought into it, it was going to be some kind of like, well, maybe we should reduce the number of weapons we're sending to this, or like maybe we should take some of this military budget and put it into building solar panels, or whatever these projects are. It never really was like, hey, let's dismantle the whatever 200 military bases that the United States has around the country or around the world or something like that, right? Um so yeah, I'm sure you have points to respond to what I've just said there, but it was like for us, we were like, we just want to do something different. But I think the problem with our approach, right? And I mean, there's pros and cons to any approach that we take within this media sphere, but because we don't engage with it at all, I think some people can think, oh, well, we're kind of like on the same team as these folks, or like we will make criticisms, but it's usually like just a question or a comment or whatever within one of our streams. And it's not a sustained engagement in the way that I see what you're doing as that. um Partly because I can't imagine spending that amount of time. The last thing I'll say is, I would my preference, and this gets me in trouble with my family and everybody else, is when I want to see mainstream, or when I want to see corporate propaganda, I go straight to the horse's mouth. So I would actually rather watch Fox News or rather watch MSNBC most of the time, because like I want to know what kind of like psychological warfare and counterinsurgency those outlets are doing. But to your point, that's kind of what they do, right? So they look at those places and they can pull apart, whatever so and so or so, is doing, but nobody's really doing that to them, and not from to their left on any kind of consistent basis. So anyways, I just want to thank you for, again, your public service, but I think that is an important thing, and so I do think that you provide a missing piece to this, whatever project that we're a part of. And I agree with you too in terms of having humility around, especially in the light of the last couple of years, around whatever that project is and how far that project is from where it really needs to be before we can take ourselves too seriously.
No, I appreciate it, and I think you're correct on that. Where sometimes it feels like we're just like paddling in place, and we have been for so long. But in terms of this, like I really do view, and I have some disagreements with people in this space where I really do view Hasan Piker, Sam Cedar, Emma Bigley, and like these characters as like counter-revolutionary propagandists. Um, I really recently started engaging with their work, Socialism for All. I'm not sure if you've like communicated with them at all, but I mean, mostly does like audiobooks. Like he'll just read stuff, which is really cool, making things accessible like that. But sometimes he'll dip his toes in criticizing the same people I criticize, and it was hilarious because I don't watch a song like that. I've never got into Twitch, so he's one of the characters that I really, although I think that he is definitely the biggest like sheepdog on here to the Democratic Party. I can't. I disagree with you. I don't think he's funny. If you're funny, like I'll give you so much grace because like I grew up roasting people. Like I love talking shit. Like if you're able to get me, then like my love for you grows exponentially because I'm like, oh, okay, like you're putting thought and care into your shit talking about me. Like that warms my heart. That's the way I grew up. So when somebody's funny, like I'm able to point that out. I listen to certain people who are, for all intents purposes, reactionaries because I want to keep a ear to the ground there, but they have to be somewhat entertaining. And with Hassan, I just really can't. And I wish I could because it would make it easier to stay in tune to what he's pushing, instead of like even the Majority Report. I used to watch them a lot more than I do now, and just because like if Sam Cedar doesn't try to be funny, at least he's informative from a liberal position. But trying to be funny, it just makes me like physically upset because I'm like, you don't have to do that. You're not funny. It's not you. It's fine. Move forward. Find another shtick. It'll work out. So I wish they were more entertaining, and but also like they don't have to be. They don't have to be. So it is what it is. But what I was getting at for Socialism for All was he was criticizing Hassan for using like actual theory, like Lenin, and quote mining for for why we need to support Grant Plattner, for why we need to support the Democratic Party.
I saw a tweet just to interject
Yep.
for a second, from Ryan Grimm, and this got
Mm,
shared into one of my texts, my text groups, and yeah, he was talking about how, I mean, funny. First of all, talking about how Grant Plattner tells him, or whatever the guy's name. I don't know. I didn't
yeah.
know who this guy was until I found out he had a Nazi tattoo. So that's how like
Mhm,
much I don't pay attention to some of this stuff. But you know, Ryan was talking about, oh, he's my bartender, he's my oyster salesman. Like if you want to say being an oyster salesman makes you petty bourgeois or bourgeois, like that, this is fine. Like he's around working class people all the time. And then was like,
his
you
employees.
know, he said he said the people he sells oysters to. And then he said he was like Marx was like petty bourgeois, Engels was bourgeois. Um, and
He
then
mentioned
he
Che.
said he did mention Che. He mentioned Lenin, of course, and
Yeah,
then he said Stalin was working class, which is noteworthy or something along those lines. Which I thought like I didn't even know where he was going, but I think it was just like a jab at like Russia and USSR and Stalin, but uh but also a suggestion, I guess, that if you are actually working class, that maybe you're more predisposed to being like fascistic or something like that, right? Which, like, I don't want to get into a debate about Stalin today, but it was just a whole. It was such an interesting thing because I was like, first of all, like, you're Ryan Grimm. Like, what the fuck are you doing talking about Lenin and like,
mhm,
like you don't. This is not your theoretical backdrop. You guys are all like neo-Kauskyites. Like, So
mm.
anyways, that was just it is interesting. But continue your point of Hassan bringing those people up. I just think there's a relationship here to what's going on.
No, I was just gonna shout out Socialism for All for breaking that down because that's kind of the main reason why I have avoided theory and engaging in it online is because the quote mining is just insufferable. And oh, the big thing is reading the most obscure thing to support your position. I think Haas from Infrared and the whole like weird ass I don't know what they're calling themselves now, like the communists. They had so many name change, but what are they calling themselves now? The what's that communist group calling themselves? Shoot,
American Communist Party, ACP. Is that who you're talking about?
is that who they are? Is that what they're calling themselves?
The
Like
MAGA
Haas
folks. Is that?
Infrared? Yeah,
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 the
yeah.
MAGA.
It's
Yeah, okay.
it's
Yeah.
ACP, the American Communist Party. Yeah.
Yeah, so fuck them too, but that's why I hate like the theory quote mining because it's such a like one, you come off like really dweeby, like just fucking be normal. That's how I know that you don't engage with normal people. But other than that, it's like it's fighting to find the most obscure quote. But when you're using like text that we should all be reading, right, to support why you should, like, you're reading it so wrong. It really did remind me like of when Drake, misinterpreted Kendrick's song and claimed like, oh, that he got molested, when the song is about him not getting molested, right? And sorry, I'm taking it there. My bad, my bad. That's just how my mind works sometimes. And I'm like, you're reading the text so wrong that you're like the left Drake. You're like this, the left streamer Drake is what Hasan Piker is, and it makes so much sense that he's that popular, and that's the type of character that he presents himself as. That you can't even read simple text, and that's coming from me, someone who like will tell you like, hey, like I struggle to read this stuff because I get distracted. Like I need to be physically active. I need to move. So it's difficult for me to sit down and read sometimes, even though we all have to. It's like cardio. You got to do the road work. You got to get out and hit pavement. And sometimes you got to open the book and just fucking read and take notes and annotate. And it's boring. And hopefully you could do it with comrades and friends to make it easier and to hold you accountable, which is sometimes the most difficult part, and to stay consistent. So shout out to Socialism for All, because it was so funny to watch that, to see somebody use, because the pedo Vosh did that for Biden, and to see that how they start repeating tactics, because I was talking about them being counter-revolutionary propagandists. Sam Seder to this day gets upset at Ralph Nader for not dropping out of the race soon enough. Never mind what happened in Florida, right? Never mind that. Never mind the Bush association with the CIA, and at the time it was the older brother Jeb. Never mind all that. No, let's blame Ralph Nader, who came out and like bend the knee to the Democratic Party anyways. But that's how like obsessed these people are with preventing any type of third party, even if it isn't a vanguard party, even if it isn't a revolutionary party, because they're there to maintain and uphold that two-party system. Now, I hate the people like Revolutionary Blackout Network. I hate people like Jimmy Dore and Heartlands Media who push this dumbass post-wobbly like bullshit, when it's like, I don't care how many parties we have available to us. I don't care what the selection is. If we don't have a vanguard party, it's all irrelevant. Like everything is going to be either reformism or just trying to put a band-aid on this like fucking decapitated corpse, that is just spreading disease around the world. But anyhow, now I'm rambling. I think it's important to call these people out because they are so popular, because they're seen as the rational left, and they control the Overton window of the conversation. And so you see them now on MSNBC. You see them on what is now this like Pod Save America. These guys were like Obama speechwriters. You're gonna tell me they're independent left media? Get the hell out of here. They're doing commercials for Walmart on their podcast. Like, what are we doing here? But that's what's normalized, and that's what is pushed to people, and that's what is readily like accessible to people. They're not too radical. It's not scary. It's not challenging in any way. It's not forcing you to self-reflect and do any work. It's not a call to action. It's a call to being passive and doing what you normally do. Oh, the only difference, the most radical thing is, don't just vote for the president, vote in your primary, your midterms. That is as involved as they want you to get. Maybe do some phone banking for who? For another Democrat. So it's really frustrating seeing this, but I do think that they are counter-revolutionary propagandists meant to control the Overton window, meant to keep the conversation within what is comfortable and unchallenging to the system. And they're the largest voices. It's Sam Seder and Hasan Piker, and they both occupy different spaces of the same operation, which is to prevent anyone moving further to the left. And anyone that does is either going to get used by them or is going to get vilified by them. It's one or the other.
Appreciated. Some good comments in the chat. I'll pull them up in a bit. So maybe this is actually a moment where, yeah, we can talk a little bit about this. Like, how do you source like what you do? Because you sit there and you stream for like 4, 5. I think you made it 6 hours once. And also, I don't really understand what you do with your videos, right? Because they're up for a little while and then you move them somewhere else, or you take them down, or like. bring like
Yeah, I just unlist them, and they're on Deculturation Live is where everything stays up.
okay.
I haven't like look, I do need to take this more serious, but I got a full time job. It's difficult for me to navigate. I recently like growing up first generation in a Mexican household. You're told you don't get handouts. You work hard, and you work harder to get through whatever trauma or issues you're going through. And if you ask for help, that's shameful. That means that you failed, especially as a man. All right. And so recently I had to like really do the work of like getting past um this limitation of saying if I set up a Patreon, that's not asking for a handout if I'm putting in work. But it's difficult for me to take this as work, even though, yeah, like I'm doing 4 6 hours plus like, setting everything up and making sure that there's some type of like connectivity with everything that I'm covering. Now working on edited videos, I'm finally getting comfortable to say, all right, if people want to like help out, please do so. But I'm still going to do the work regardless. It's just going to be difficult to get things out or to do the quality of work that I want to do because of my lack of time. Um, how do like I don't know. Like thankfully, my algorithm hasn't really changed too much from when I first started like watching these people, and it's actually a pretty small circle. You mentioned Ryan Grimm, Crystal Ball, Emma Vigeland, Sam Cedar, and they're all interconnected, or they were at some point with Anna Kasparian, Cenk Uygur, and Cenk Uygur with TYT had all these like umbrella channels or little satellites with the Humanist Report. I think his name's like Mike Figueroa or something like that. And then now they started the leftist mafia, which you see Anchorman when like all the different like networks have a rumble.
Yeah.
Like we need to set something up because you're calling yourself leftist mafia. It's like man, I say this jokingly. This is just a joke. Black Myth Podcast did an episode on Angela Davis, and I think the title of the episode is like Angela Davis was a Black Panther, and they're dispelling that myth, right? I didn't know this, which is why I love them so much. And shout out to Two Black because I got to meet him. I have my copy of Launching Black Rage signed, so super happy nerd over here. Anywho, they said that Angela Davis and her campus tried using the name Black Panthers, and that somebody rolled up on them and like not so nicely told them like you're not using that name. And I'm like, we need a little bit of that energy. We need to like
At the same time, I don't like who wants to claim leftist. I don't know. I mean, that's
right, exactly. And that's the frustrating part where I'm like, so, and we'll talk about this in a little bit. The whole like democratic socialist versus socialist. I don't know why they do this, and they play around a lot with it, where they push that Bernie is a socialist, they push that Mamdani is a socialist, when they've publicly stated we are not socialists, we are democratic socialists, and they make the distinctions. But you have the PSL celebrating Mamdani's victory. You have Hasan Piker claiming that suddenly socialism and democratic socialism, they're not all too different. But when he's been called out on like pretending to be a socialist or hiding his ideological position, he'll start crying about, well, it's your job to find out the distinction between democratic socialists and socialists. It's 2025, do the work. But it's like, wait, but you're contributing to this conflation for your own benefit. Literally, I think it was Bowman and Mehdi Hassan, and I'm trying to think of who else was in that group. I think Hassan was in there too, just a bunch of fucking losers. And they're all like, oh yeah, socialism is a bad word anymore. Mamdani was able to win with the socialist label. And I'm like, that's okay. You're not helping. You're not helping because you're contributing to the narrative that the right pushes that you're all a bunch of socialist commies when you're not. You're absolutely not, but you're trying to use that for street cred because you know that the youth are so dissatisfied of capitalism, and you're trying to rebrand yourself. They used to call themselves liberals, then progressives, then like now democratic socialists. Now they're trying to claim socialists as well. It's all rebranding. It's all aesthetics for them. So that's part of the frustration there. That the way that they're able to capture language, and you're right. it's silly, and I was, I was being, I was joking around, but why fight or complain over somebody calling themselves leftist mafia is because unless you know that the term leftist is used to for liberals and everyone to hide behind and to not be specific on where they actually stand, then it is kind of pointless. But at the same time, like they do this as a branding exercise, and you have people like the Rational National, right? Who's out from Canada. If you're in Canada, if you're in Australia, if you're in somewhere that's a settler colonial project, and you're not focusing and bringing attention to the crimes that your settler colonial project is doing, and instead for clicks, you're focusing on the US, like what is it? You make me sick to my stomach, fam. Like, come on, like you have an opportunity to educate so many people on the inner workings of so often ignored and neglected and normalized atrocious behavior. I remember I met the guys from a they used to go by a tribe called Red, and now they go by Hallucination, and they're First Nations. And we're talking after a show, and it came up, and I'm like, it feels like Canada has the best PR of any settler colonial project. And they started laughing. They're like, and then we had a long conversation about the image of Canada and how it's portrayed, and how Canadians are seen as just nice people, so apologetic, and then you see how they treat First Nations people, and they're like just as bloodthirsty, genocidal as any Zionist. But we don't treat them that way. We don't recognize them that way. And so we have to challenge, you know, the perception of things. And if you're a leftist and you're not doing it because it's more beneficial financially for you to cover the US, which you can't even vote in, you can't even influence. It'd be as ridiculous. Like, I'll talk about China and my criticism of, like, hey, why has your trade increased with the Zionist entity while they're committing a genocide? Like, I should be able to criticize that and not try to like scapegoat accountability of being in the US and our failures to organize to stop, genocide from occurring. 100%. I'm not going to make my whole image criticizing China when I'm in the belly of the beast. That doesn't mean I don't get to criticize them, but I'm not going to make my entire image. And you have these Canadian figures, Lance from the Serfs, like make their whole thing about talking about US politics. Nobody knows what's going on with Canada. Nobody knows what's happening with First Nations people. You're there. I think you have a responsibility to talk about it. At first, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to talk about LA politics. Because of my union work, I'm involved in interviewing people running for like small seats, if I'm being polite. It kind of is my responsibility because I'm in those rooms. They're asking for our endorsements from our unions. Like, I should talk about it. Newsom just refused what, like 14,000 licenses? Issuing driver's licenses for undocumented workers. That's kind of fucking important because he's going to run for president. Without question, he's running for president. He has the fucking look for it, which is like half the battle there. Kennedy proved that. But I'm out here and it affects me and it affects my family members. I should be talking about it. You have Canadians focusing on the US politics. It's just stupid shit like that that pisses me off, where I'm like, where's your sense of accountability and responsibility to where you're positioned? But yeah, leftist mafia, and they all live like in this ecosystem. So it's not as big as it seems at first. So if you're tapped into one, you're gonna eventually like tap into the other, and eventually they all have slight disagreements or full-on fights and beefs, which is always comical, because they're fighting over nonsense. I don't know if you saw the whole Hasan Piker versus Ethan Klein beef, and H3H3, one of the biggest channels. They had a falling out because of October 7th. The thing is, it was known that Ethan Klein, US born, had an Israeli citizenship. He lived there, he married an IOF veteran, and Hila Klein. You hear her speak, and it's like hearing somebody speak fucking Afrikaner or whatever they call it. Like, you're very much aware, like, oh, this is a made up bullshit language. It's a colonizer tone. There's no denying it. She never hid the fact that she was in the IOF. She kind of bragged about it. So you have the largest leftist political commentator in Hasan Piker, who's willing to go into business with the Zionist family and start a show called Leftovers. Again, left. All right. And they talk about politics, literally have the White House as their background. He knew that they were Zionists. He knew they were Zionists. And it wasn't until October 7th that it became an issue. And again, I never really watched too much of their stuff, but I was able to find a clip prior to October 7th where Ethan Klein mocks Palestinian sovereignty. And Hasan Piker just laughs it off. Just laughs. Oh, he literally says, "Oh, you don't want to go down that rabbit hole." If you say you don't want to go down that rabbit hole, it's because you know where it's going to lead to. It's going to lead to the audience realizing this is a Zionist, and they're going to be like, "Hold on, like you're preaching all these left politics, and you're in business with the Zionists." And so October 7th forced that out because the most liberal Zionists, the hood came off completely. The most liberal Zionists, the hood came off completely, and you saw like the complete like breakdown of their brains, right? Because their safety got challenged, right? Their supremacy got challenged. The idea that they weren't gonna have that fucking retirement home on Palestinian land started to get like pulled away from them. And so then they had a falling out over that. And even then, it was Ethan Klein that ended the show, not Hasan Piker. And it's just frustrating because the only reason I had heard of H3 was because they were on Tiger Belly, the comedy podcast with Bobby Lee. And even in that, they talk about when they started their show, they would hide certain signs in the background to hide the fact that they were in Israel, that they were in the Zionist entity, because they didn't want to, they knew what was up from then. They knew what was, I mean, these are not stupid people. And sure enough, then they started normalizing it because nobody cared when we're talking about mainstream media. But they shared a story in that podcast that blew me away because Ethan said that he had a friend, and I believe he was Lebanese. It was his best friend, like childhood best friend, who found out because Ethan invited him that he was going to go live in the Zionist entity, that he was going to marry an IOF soldier. And so Ethan invites his friend and he says, "No, like I'm not going there." And he cut him off. The friend cut off Ethan because he's like, "You're going to go live there? You're going to marry, an IOF veteran? Like we're done. Our friendship's over." And I'm like, this Lebanese person, I'm pretty sure he was Lebanese, who grew up with Ethan Klein, who had a social, had that excuse that Jon Stewart was just talking about when you get together with your reactionary family members, had that built-in excuse to overlook it, to stay friends and be like, "Hey, you know what? I don't feel comfortable going there, but we'll stay in touch." And he said, "Nah, we're done," which is a principled position. This, respectfully, nobody knows who this person is. Had no gain for his integrity, any financial, nothing. Just out of principle, said, "We're done being friends because you're marrying a white supremacist, because you're marrying a colonizer, because you're going to go live in a settler colonial project." Whereas Hasan Piker, the largest leftist figure, says, "Nah, let's do business together. Now let's normalize liberal Zionism by starting a show together." And if Ethan Klein would have controlled himself the way that Sam Cedars been able to control himself, the way that Peter Beinart, the poster boy of liberal Zionism, has been able to control himself. He was just on Democracy Now! Pushing his fucking book, focusing and censoring Jewish people. Oh, what's going to happen to us after we committed a genocide? What the fuck is wrong with you, bro? People are still being murdered in mass, exterminated, and you're sitting there writing a book about what does this mean about us? Where is our identity after this? Like, the level of just insidious, like, dehumanizing of Palestinians that you have to enact to sit down and write that book and pitch it. Democracy Now!, at the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, censoring the Jewish identity. And there's that frustration of, like, you see it in those different levels. Whether it's Peter Beinart on the Daily Show or whether it was Ethan Klein with Hasan Piker, you see that normalization of liberal Zionism. And if it wasn't for Ethan Klein saying, like, "I'm too much of a Zionist to deal with this," that show would have continued if it was, up to Hasan. And it's like, why would you do this when you're already filthy rich? You're a multimillionaire. You're already the largest streamer. He has like tens of thousands of viewers live. Why would you do this? Like, what is wrong with you? What do you lack as a human being in your character that you're willing to normalize this, that you're willing to contribute to this? And you see it with Mamdani. It's not enough for him to say, "Hey, I'm not anti-Semitic." He has to say, "I'm going to have Zionists of all spectrums, not just liberal Zionists, in my administration." What is wrong with you? If you replace Zionists with any other white supremacists, people would like you to say, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Nazi is the easy one. And I'm getting frustrated the Nazi comparisons because we inspire them over here. We inspired that birth of Nazism, right? So Klansman is usually my preferred. Like if you would team up with fucking David Duke, you would have David Duke in your administration be like, look, I didn't ask him what his opinion on race was. Because that's what Zorhan said. I'm not gonna ask the garbage guy, well, you know what? And I'm like, can we be honest and realistic for a second? You've been standing side by side Zionists through and through. Alex Soros, that other, who was that? That older white lady that was like, I'm Jewish and a Zionist, and I think they were down in they were in New York. They were on the ground. I'm forgetting her name right now, but just shit like that. Keeping Jessica Tish, like you're surrounding yourself with Zionists. You're saying loud and proud you will have them in your administration. You're a fucking collaborator. You're not pro-Palestinian. How can you call yourself an ally to anyone when you're collaborating with their enemy, with their colonizers? It's white supremacy is so fucking frustrating because, you know, my disagreement with Bad Empanada was he was focusing on Grant Plattner being an American supremacist. And I'm like, that would work if Grant Plattner wasn't on record being anti-black. And they don't even bother to excuse that, right? His anti-blackness was like, he was on Reddit being like, why don't black people tip? Why don't black people? I'm a bartender and black people don't tip, and this and there's got to be something going on. I don't know, motherfucker. The fact that you're asking that question might be the reason why they're uncomfortable with tipping you. Maybe something about you.
What part of Maine is he from?
Maine is 90% white. Doesn't matter.
I went to college in Maine. Maine is the whitest state in America.
Is it really? I was gonna say Utah.
Yeah.
I know it's 90% white because we went over it. Because yeah, the whole American supremacist angle. My question is, one, we know he's anti-black, so he makes the distinctions between Americans. And two, why would an American supremacist have a German supremacist tattoo? It makes no sense. What it is white supremacy first and foremost. The U.S. can break into like different bits and pieces and become balkanized, and they could start calling themselves something else, and they probably will at some point. They're still going to be white, and they're still going to uphold white supremacy. So it's just frustrating that we don't center white supremacy like it should be because, it's just identity politics. And Dr. Gerald Horne says it all the time. It's all identity politics when it's black, when it's brown people, but when it's white people, it's just normalized. It's just politics.
Yeah, I know we're going to get into that. We could talk about. Well, we want to talk about Norman Finkelstein at some point, and so yeah, we'll talk about that for sure. I'm looking at a map of Maine to see. Is he? Oh yeah. I would guess that he's. I mean, he lives in Sullivan, Maine, which is like way up. I think it's near Acadia. I mean, yeah. I would wonder. I would question how many, if any, like black folks went and bought drinks from him at a bar that he would even be able to make it.
In Washington D.C. That's when Ryan Grimm met him. That's why Ryan Grimm has this weird obsession with him. So I recommend it's going to be included in my video, but I recommend anyone check out Ryan Grimm's tweets. Ryan Grimm is, I mean, if the haircut didn't let you know, a fucking weirdo. When Trump came out saying that he was thinking about like colonizing Greenland, Ryan Grimm said, I'm heartened. Right? Look, I'm not the most educated person. I had to look it up to make sure, because I think I know what the word heartened means, but this is weird to say that you're heartened, right? Because I immediately imagine like that scene in The Grinch where his heart like grows 3 times bigger, right? And I'm like, why the fuck would you be heartened? Like I Googled the word heartened. I'm like, no. This is a journalist. He must be using it. It must mean something different. It has to. And I look it up. I'm like, why the fuck would you be heartened? And the rest of his tweet is like, well, people aren't understanding that in comparison to Ukraine, the population of Greenland is smaller. So if imperialism is going to happen, I'd rather it happen in a smaller population. And I'm like, okay, why is the population of Greenland smaller? And I'm nosy. Let's look it up. Let's find out. First, I can admit I don't know shit about Greenland. So I look it up. Sure enough, the population of Greenland is predominantly Inuit. And so I started looking into the colonization of Greenland. Not only that, Greenland, I think, still has the highest rate of suicide. And it's not because it's dark, it's not because it's cold, it's because of the effects of colonization. And so here you have this prominent, arguably the largest like journalist on the left, right? Legitimate journalist actually doing work. Maybe, I mean, now he's with Jeremy Scahill. So him and Jeremy Scahill, probably the Clan Klippenstein, those three, I think those three are the biggest journalists of the left, right? Of mainstream. And well, not mainstream, but you know what I mean.
I know.
So
Yeah, they're way up there right now. Yeah.
they're way up there. Yeah. So with that in mind, I'm like, why are you celebrating this? Oh, well, because it'll mean less death than the deaths in Ukraine. And I'm like,
what is wrong with you?
Sorry. Shout out to Tondi. I just had to do that real quick.
Yeah, no, it's so great. So I'm like, what is wrong with you that you're not willing to to do the work and to find out why that is? Instead, you're promoting, either knowingly or unknowingly. I think these people are intelligent. These people are more educated than most of us, went to better institutions. And you're promoting the recolonization of Greenland because it's better than Europeans in Ukraine getting massacred. And so you're going by a numbers game, which is a weird ass fucking already fascistic way of viewing life to begin with, but you're not even bothering to ask why that population is the way that it is. You don't bother to do the research because they're not white, so who gives a fuck about them? They're not European, so who cares about them? You're willing to dismiss it and push it aside. So he said that about Greenland, which is already weird. But in terms of Grant Plattner, yeah, no, these people love the image of a white working class, the idea of the white working class. They actually hate the white working class. They do. They despise them. And so does Grant Plattner. Grant Plattner said, yeah, all these Trump voters are stupid, racist, backwards people. I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying he does not view himself as working class. He does not view themselves as them because he wasn't. He grew up in going to a private school. Ryan Graham tried to excuse that. His, grandfather was his famous rich architect. Ryan Graham tried to excuse that. Grant Plattner's mother owned her own business and she was 18. His father was a lawyer, but he's a small town lawyer, so that's still kind of working class. All these bullshit excuses to protect this image that isn't even real. It's very reminiscent of AOC. Alejandra Ocasio-Cortez, the image was pushed that she's just a bartender. She was an intern from Kennedy. She was an intern for one of the dynasties in politics. Let's stop pretending that these people are just like you and me coming out of the mud or just obscure figures going into politics. They're not. These people are groomed. Nomiki Konst from the Majority Report, who threw her hat into a district race in New York to try and oppose a DSA endorsed Christine Gonzalez, who the Majority Report helped to smear, by the way. She helped Nomiki Konst before that. She helped coach AOC. She helped prepare her for her media obligations. So again, yeah, it feels like you're wearing a tinfoil hat, but why are all these predominantly white political commentators circling the wagons around Ryan Grimm? Why are they normalizing and downplaying a fucking death skull tattoo? Forget about the Tonkov. Let's forget the fact that it's a Nazi symbol. Why? Because we have to be generous, right? It's so frustrating. But even when we give them the benefit of the doubt, he got the tattoo to honor his time in Iraq as a gunman, as a machine gunman. What the fuck are you honoring? The massacring of civilians, of those, whether we agree with their politics or not, of the indigenous population resisting imperialism, which is their fucking right. And that's what he got the tattoo for. That's why he never got it covered up. I don't give a fuck if he's a Nazi. I don't care if he's practicing the tenets of the German National Socialist Project. I don't care. That's irrelevant to me because he's a white supremacist through and through. I always think of that scene in The Big Lebowski with John Goodman when he's say what you want about the tenets of National Socialism, but at least it's an ideology. But nihilism, look, I can't control where it all goes, but Take over, bro.
Dude, I mean, just speaking of one of my favorite movies, which is also complicated by liberal Zionism, right? And explicit Zionism in terms of Goodman's character, actually,
Bashabe.
his
Bashabe.
shout out to Theodore Herzl and all of it, yeah, I mean, yeah. um, but also, I mean, the Coen brothers are interesting in their own respect around this. At some point, we'll get into this when we do something with them with the Imperial 80s.
Hey, I'm throwing my
You
hat
know,
in that. Coen Brothers stuff. Look, I love their work.
hey man, we'd love to have
Dumb
you on.
Huh?
You said what? Dumb and Dumber?
Oh,
That's not Coen brothers.
no. I was gonna say, no. Who's Dumb and Dumber?
Farley brothers.
Farley Brothers. That's hilarious. Coen Brothers is An Ordinary Man, right? Or A Simple Man? Is it?
A Simple Man, and then yeah, Big Lebowski,
Big Lebowski.
Fargo, like
Did they
Blood
do Burn After Reading?
Simple, Raising Arizona, Burn After Reading. Yeah,
After Reading.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Farley's.
I mean,
My bad.
they're more interesting, but there is liberal Zionism, and the two of them are a little bit different on it too.
Mhm.
But anyway, that's another topic for another day.
No, I'm saying I'll throw my hat in the ring for that. For
Yeah,
any.
man.
Yeah.
We'll get in contact. We would love to have you on Imperial 80s. That'd be fun. So let's talk about the DSA and electoralism, and I'm curious your thoughts. Like, so one thing I should say, right, about these folks is you said that they don't really acknowledge the existence of another left, and I think that that's largely true, although I also think that one of the things that would be said, right, is that you or I or, Black Liberation Media, I mix what I like, anybody in our media sphere, the Tanky Group Therapy folks I talk to, like, that we are all ultra leftists ultimately, right? So that we are all basically beyond the pale of something to be taken seriously, because of our, and I'm giving their argument, our disconnection to where real people are at, and to, and a lot of this comes from like a very, again, actually, it comes from these cherry picking. It's a term that Jay Mufawad Paul uses that I kept trying to think of, right? I mean, dogmatism on one level, but it's also, um, when you selectively, you talked about the quotes game, right? Like, so some people call it a search for holy writ, and yeah, I mean, ACP traffics in this heavily. Like, Marxists say a lot of different things, right? And everything has to be read within the specific moment in history. And that doesn't mean we can't disagree, right? Also with what they say in a specific moment in history, right? But like, when Lenin says something, what he says in 1906 is going to be different than what he says in 1917, is going to be different than what he says in 1890 or whatever. And same thing with any of these figures, right? So if we just go to pull out a sentence or a paragraph from one of these people, like, yeah, you can find stuff where they're saying something that we would agree with, and you can find stuff that we would disagree with. And also, it's over 100 years ago, most of this stuff. And so, the conditions that they're operating in, it's also in Russia or wherever, right? Like, so there's like a big distinction. But people use, for instance, Lenin's piece around, what is that? So, left-wing communism and infantile disorder, right? So this is a specific intervention he's making, right? And agree or disagree, I think it's a book that has some insights in it for sure that we should think about seriously. And I think there are ways that it can be really, manipulated and distorted for people's political purposes. And like, one of the things that they'll do is they'll cite something about Lenin, saying, in the context of criticisms from folks in Great Britain, right, who were saying, no, we're not going to participate in the Labor Party because the Labor Party is ultimately, a bourgeois party, essentially. And, Lenin's argument, again, like I'm paraphrasing, people should read it for themselves. But, he's like, look, like that's where a lot of people are. That's where most of the people who are working class and who call themselves socialists or are close to socialism are. So you should engage that party to, try to, whatever. Like he has a whole region. Again, people are going to get into it, right? And so like that's kind of the way DSA, like to Marxists, like to the people that they would talk to who are Marxists within the DSA, or who are, because there are, I mean, we should also say that like there are different factions within the DSA. There are people who are trying to turn it into a communist organization. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. So it is a complicated organization to discuss, right? But the folks that we've all been talking about, like their relationship is really to the right wing of the DSA, right? It is to the people who have embraced this electoral strategy within the Democratic Party, specifically, and who want boots on the ground for that effort, and et cetera, et cetera. And so, like, their role is to defend these politicians, the squad, and everybody else that's associated with this. It is to try to get their base mobilized to support those folks. And because of this alliance within the Democratic Party, it is also often to do that to people who are to their right, right? Because they want ultimately Democrats to be more prominent than Republicans, and then they want their group of people to be more prominent within that, right? So, they would say to us, like, you all don't have anything. And of course, then they also, as you said, like they will do work to talk about why we shouldn't engage in Green Party politics, right? Debates about that, fine. But like, that's one of the things they would do, right? Is to say you shouldn't do that. They would be against or opposed to like PSL efforts to run elections and that sort of stuff, right? Um, And I mean, all of that is within the realm of elections, which I understand. I mean, you already talked about a vanguard party. Like my, it wasn't even until this last election that I engaged in talking about elections at all. And I only felt prompted to do so because I was on YouTube, and a number of people in the chats and the comments were just like, hey man, like we want to know where you stand on this. Like talk to us about this. This shit is going on. We need you to say something. Because I hate it. Like honestly, I would rather just not talk about it. I think electoral politics in Empire is largely just a circus and a distraction. Um, I don't know where I'm going with that. Like, I guess the question is related to the DSA and their approach on it. um you know how do you think about this? How do you engage with this at all? Obviously you engage with it on some level, on a practical level, like you said, within offline, and in those things, right? And I think to some extent, and that's kind of always been Jared Ball's discussion about this, is he's like, look, we all are engaging this in some level, like whether we like to admit it or not. And so we might as well try to think about collectively what could we do together to engage in it as a process of politicizing people, as a process of, um, you know, even protesting what is going on, or putting forward a different set of ideas for people to engage in, and all of that. Take it where you want to from there, man.
No, like I said, like I've worked alongside DSA because of my union organizing. It always makes it uncomfortable to be as critical as I want to be, and I am. I don't hold back, but it does force me to put a face to it, and that's the difficult part. If you start organizing, this is why I don't understand why it's so pointless right now, but it's even more annoying if you're actually like in these spaces when communists beef with anarchists, when anarchists beef with communists, and it's like there's like 10 of us here. Can we stop? Like, what are we doing? It just, to me, it's like more embarrassing when that shit happens, because I'm like, and shout out to all the anarchists because
yeah, I want you to continue on, but I just want to say this has always been why I have, been like, okay, we can have anarchists and communists come on, even though there's sometimes stuff that I'm like, I don't agree with anything about what you are saying right now in certain ways, but like, I do think that there just is a need, again, like people who actually want something totally different than what this system is. There's a need for more of us to be able to come together and to have discussion with each other and to share ideas and to like, and I I've always been opposed to like the sectarianism shit that happens, because it's like you're actually having debates about what's going to happen after the revolution. And I hate to tell you, my friend, but we have a long way to go before any of that means anything. But go ahead, man.
No, it's selfish pandering, and it's so annoying because it's like, I'm not an anarchist, but some of like the coolest people I've met are anarchists. Some of the people that are regularly out there feeding fucking people. I know people like to like make fun of was it not communal aid, what's the word I'm looking for, not aid, it's
Mutual aid, is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
People like, I don't know where people started making fun of it, and I'm like, damn homie, have you never been hungry? You know who's not making fun of it? The homeless people that are benefiting from this. Like, stop. Like I don't understand where people's are like, what world do you live in? That the same thing with book clubs. Oh, another lefty book club. Have you looked at the literacy rate? Have you heard me fucking read on stream? Like, yeah, we need fucking book clubs. Like, it's you know what I mean? Like, come on. Like, I get annoyed at shit like that because it's like, where do you think we are? Where, like, how, what fantasy fucking world do you live in that we can afford to be wasting time like this? That we can afford to be putting people down that are getting out there? We need to be like humble. We need to be realistic with how behind we are. And it's not by accident. I mean, the state makes sure of that, and the state pushes these political figures and fucking political pundits for that same reason, to keep us behind. In terms of DSA, the problem is the DSA isn't a party. It's not a party. It is a wing of the Democratic Party. In fact, it's funneling whatever revolutionary potential we have into the Democratic Party. If the DSA was its own party, it'd be a different conversation. But if the DSA was its own party, it would be in the same place as the Greens. It'd be the same place as the PSL. And that's the issue that I have with a lot of things is, can we just be honest about reality? I'm not here to bullshit you. I'm not here to lie to anyone. I might be misinformed, and I'm more than happy to be educated. But the DSA is not a party. Okay, the local DSA still is behind AOC, but the national isn't. But it's kind of it's irrelevant. None of them can hold her accountable to anything. They need AOC more than AOC's ever needed the DSA. Well, maybe not in the beginning. Again, for that street cred. Mom Donnie does not give a fuck. People were complaining that in his shoot, I'm blanking out on some shit, but his transition team, that there was no DSA. There was no DSA. And the defense was, well, it's just a transition team. In the main team, there might be DSA member, this and that. Why would he? I'm not saying he's not going to, but what difference would it make for him? He's aligning now with the Democratic Party more and more. Obama called him twice. You think they called him to be like, hey, how can we put DSA up? You think the DSA ever came up in that conversation? I don't think so. I doubt that. If anything, it was like, hey, how many zeros? That's more likely part of the conversation than fucking the DSA. The DSA is not a party. Does this mean that at some point, out of the need to do something to organize, I won't join the DSA? No, I'm not ruling that shit out, because there are different, not chapters, but branches of the DSA that want to move people to the left. And I think that it's beneficial to where we're at, and being realistic, that gaining some of that organizing experience is fundamental. Learning how to work with others, learning how to show up, learning how to communicate, learning about bureaucracy, as annoying as it might be. I think there's benefit in that, especially when so many of us are so green. All right. We talked about my union stuff. And the thing is, the way that my union works, again, just going into, not trying to get too into the details, but we haven't really been active in the political scene out here in LA. And I think for if you knew the details, for honestly, it makes sense why we weren't. But now we're in a situation where we can be, and I'm learning a lot of shit. Like the meetings that I'm in, I'm quietly taking endless notes. Oh, what do you mean by that? Or when does that happen? Or how does this cycle? Like stupid little questions that I know are annoying, but at the same time, the people that have been doing this for years appreciate because they see somebody younger getting involved. Are these people like leftists? No. Have they said some shit that surprised me? That is like anti-cop, anti like ICE? Yes. I was shocked. I was like, oh fuck. Okay, that's surprising. Are these my comrades? No. But these are people that are proactively trying to improve the lives of working class people. And so, but if you're not in those rooms, if you're not doing the work to try and learn, what are you going to bring to an actual left organization? So all I'm saying is we don't have one yet. There's no Vanguard party. Learn from others' mistakes. Get involved. Do your mistakes in the place that hopefully isn't going to be too much of a negative. But if it is, then they're still working for the Democratic Party anyways. Who cares? If it is, then the PSL. The reason I didn't join PSL years ago is because of Brian Becker. I started looking into Brian Becker. I'm like, this guy's a fucking idiot, because I used to listen to his podcast. And what made me question him is he started having Richard Wolff on. And Richard Wolff, I mean, from my limited understanding, sounds like I can't stand Richard Wolff for a lot of reasons, but it's trying to sell us co-ops in place of revolution. And it's trying to tell us that we can compete in the fucking market, and that's how we can bring about socialism in the workplace. I can't stand people like that, because it's like, one, you're outright lying. We're never going to compete with fucking capitalists in the free fucking market. And two, let's say we did. Let's say we were successfully challenging them. This is an aside, my bad. But I just can't stand Richard Wolff. Let's say we did. How quickly would they crush us or buy us out? Like, let's stop. Anyhow, my bad. I forgot that I dislike Richard Wolff that much. I think he was my Norm Finkelstein before Norm Finkelstein.
I gotta be honest, like I don't pay that much attention to the stuff that he does. The thing that I always am a little bit, the thing that I've seen him do that bothers me more. I've more seen this from other Marxists, but he does have a version of this, is like this belief that the kind of objective contradictions of capitalism, by that I mean like the tendency towards crisis, that this is going to somehow like create this big opening, right, for revolution and change, right? And I don't know if he still kind of does that, but I have seen him do that in the past. And yeah, I mean, I think I've told you that we've been reading Ali Kadri a lot, but one of the things that he is just fundamental with him, and he also draws it back to Lenin and imperialism, but um it's just that like capitalism is very effective at resolving crises, and it does it through war, right? Like that, and that the people in power understand that very well, and that war is a process of accumulation, and people who don't, who see that as like somehow outside of the market, or outside of um, this argument that we spend too much on war, and that this is like it's a drain on the economy or something like that, right? These kind of arguments, and what we should do actually is take that war money and invest it in something else. It's like there's a fundamental misunderstanding of imperialism and what's going on here. Like, because if the capitalists understand actually that if they did that, that their system would collapse, like that, and so anyway, that's another, we could do that at another time, but let's talk about Norman Finkelstein. So because you brought him up.
Oh yeah.
And and this might be a good way also to segue back to the discussion of liberal Zionism, because
Mhm.
um you talked about how that was like a really kind of important entry point for you in wanting to get on and talk your shit about these people. you know, and I'll be honest, like I don't think I was as in tune with it, even right after October 7th, um, as you are. Certainly, I have grown up around liberal Zionism. You know, I mean, I think my father, I think in a lot of ways, like, although he's, you know, we're not Jewish, right? But like he had liberal Zionist politics, and I still have to kind of have conversations with him about that, you know. Um, and so that was something even that I grew up right with in my life, and kind of actually shaped for a long time my own lack of understanding too, and like a really good like anti-colonial politics with regard to Palestinians. And for me, it was largely Palestinians who dispelled me of it, right? And conversations with them, and in particular, just shout out to like the Good Shepherd Collective, who, you know, did a lot of work to kind of, you know, push this. And we've had a couple conversations with them specifically about it and about liberal Zionism, you know, in their view, even within the Palestine solidarity movement and the detrimental effects of that. Thinking largely with like, you know, the politics of If Not Now or Jewish Voice for Peace, right? And these groups and the connections into J Street, and um, obviously Bernie, right, is like a very obvious example. Um, and so I really, you know, I became aware of it, and it made me much more sensitive, especially after October 7th, of like who I brought on, and being more open also to conversations and feedback from people. If we did have somebody on that, and they were like, hey, they're saying stuff that's, you know, a little bit suspect right now. This is a little bit liberal Zionisty, etc. Um, that I try to pay attention to that, and you know, not continuously, you know, platform those folks and stuff like that, because I didn't want to be contributing to some delusion, um, or watering down, right, of the analysis that people needed to be hearing. Um, but Norman Finkelstein in particular, I think, is one that confuses a lot of people. He's somebody who, interestingly, I mean, he has very, you know, work that people know really well, and like, you know, things like the Holocaust industry. And also I've had Palestinians tell me like that his work was important to them at a certain point, and that um that he, you know, they appreciated certain contributions of his overall and that sort of stuff. And I do too sometimes, like when he's just you know, debating a, you know, a reactionary or like a straight up Zionist. Like, I find him amusing sometimes, and I find him successful at that. And in the way that I appreciate other people debating, because I don't like to debate. Like, there's a part of me sometimes it's like, you know, okay, do that. But I do very much recognize both the liberal Zionism within his politics, as well as really various forms of racism, in my view. Anti-Black racism, in my view, we could talk about that, but also anti-Palestinian racism. And so one of the things I find interesting is how much he has been platformed after October 7th, because I really didn't, I felt like he was pretty much like nobody was talking to this guy for a lot of years. And it started to come back again when he wrote that book about identity politics, which again, I think is actually a terrible book, even though I know will be interesting for you and I to talk a little bit about identity politics too. But yeah, I mean, he's been very heavily platformed, especially by some of the people that we're talking about in this kind of media sphere, as well as people even more mainstream than that. Um, and you know, yeah. So say what you want to say about it. You're muted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry. I think it'll be good to let him speak for himself a little bit too. Let me make sure that I have the right timestamps here. Uh, I'm about to add another one. It's just wild how. So if you don't mind pulling up the Guardian piece, if you can, um, because I love using like just letting people speak for themselves sometimes, because it just highlights they're bullshit, and you can't. Look, I'm not trying to, lie to anyone. So there's a part in here that he literally says, because he was held at Ben Gurion, the Ben Gurion airport, and he says literally, he was held from entering the Zionist entity, and he literally says, "I am not an enemy of Israel." Right? You have access to it, or is it paywalled?
Oh, is it the video? Like, what's the?
No. So
What
in
am I trying
here,
to pull?
yeah,
Yeah.
Finkelstein, the son of a Holocaust survivor, who has accused Israel of using the genocidal Nazi campaign against Jews to justify its actions against the Palestinians, was detained by the Israeli Security Service, Shin Bet, when he landed at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion Airport on Friday. So he's held there for questioning, right? And he literally says, I did my best to provide absolutely candid and comprehensive answers to all the questions put to me. I am confident that I have nothing to hide apart from my political views and the supporting scholarship. There isn't much to say for myself. Alas, no suicide mission, no secret rendezvous with terrorist organizations. I've always supported a two-state solution based on the 1967 borders. I am not an enemy of Israel. So already supporting a two-state solution is justifying and rewarding and normalizing the Nakba, right? You're saying the land that you stole is yours, right? To say I'm not an enemy of Israel, again, substitute Israel with any other white supremacist, genocidal, settler colonial project. If you're not their enemy, then what the fuck are you? Their ally? Their critic? Because being a critic is not sufficient. It never was, but even now, amid a genocide, it definitely shouldn't be. Now, in his defense, this was 17 years ago. 17 years ago, but the issue is his biggest claim is I've been doing this for how many decades? So for this entire time that you want to brag about, you've been critical of the Zionist entity, but you have not been an anti-Zionist. And you say yourself, I am not an enemy of Israel. Imagine saying I'm not an enemy of Nazi Germany. You're like, wait, what the fuck is wrong with you? Why wouldn't you be? Right? So that's one in his own words right there. The link that I posted above it, above the Guardian, if you don't mind pulling that up, when you mentioned that he was kind of like an obscure figure for a little bit, Piers Morgan has had him on, and I think that really helped catapult him back into like the mainstream. And I believe it's this section here.
Yeah.
He
Hang
talks
on.
about
You go ahead.
no worries. But he talks
I'm gonna
about
pull it up.
this guy is such a fucking white savior. Like it's disgusting. He says in this, you'll hear him say, I had given up on the Palestinians, and that means that if I gave up on them, they had no hope. Do you know how sick you have to be to say that shit? If you want to go back a little bit.
Yeah. Yep. You ready? All right.
Chronicling every detail of the horror that had been inflicted on those people. And I gave up on them.
Okay.
And that meant if I gave up, they had no future because I was the last chronicler.
Okay, but what I would say,
Gaza.
all right, but what
I have the only book
but Professor,
that's been written on the subject.
Let me respond. I would respond by saying
So you see where his mind's at. If I gave up on them, they had no hope. Does it get more white savior than that? I'm not quite sure. There's another clip where Dr. Jared Ball, man, it's so frustrating that these people like shut us out from like their spaces, but it makes sense why. And Dr. Jared Ball, after our conversation, mentioned like, oh, you know what? I noticed that Katie Halper kind of did a little bit of PR, a little PR crisis coverage for Norm Finkelstein after the conversation he had with him, because Dr. Ball was asking very simple questions.
Yeah.
Allowing Norm Finkelstein to basically wrap that rope around, himself. But in this, he says, yeah, It's going to be a little bit long, and I don't know if you want to speed it up because Norm Finkelstein is like long-winded. I think 1.5 is pretty good for Norm. But I just want to remind everyone that when Norm Finkelstein debated Destiny, who's an accused and most likely a pedophile, one of the other bigger liberal streamers, when he debated him and I'm forgetting the other gentleman's name, who's he was part of the New Historians, Norm Finkelstein for whatever reason.
Benny Morris, I think.
Benny Morris, thank you. When he was debating both of them, Norm Finkelstein said, people accuse me of talking slow, but that's because I choose every word deliberately because I understand the power of the English language. Again, a fucking blowhard, but, just highlighting that he chooses his words carefully. If he hadn't said that, maybe I'd be more dismissive of the dumb shit that he says. But he's announced in probably his largest video or largest videos that he's participated in that he chooses his words carefully. So let's hear his words carefully here, please.
Is the remedy. If people are suffering, if people are the victims of unjustified violence, cruelty, if you're a solidarity group, if you want to show solidarity, it seems to me that your first concern, if you're a person who mostly works with books, scholarship, research, your first concern should be to present the strongest case possible for those who are the victims of unjust cruelty and violence. You should be trying to make the strongest case possible. Now, what if it happens, let's take the Israel-Palestine conflict. What if it happens, say someone like myself, yes, I'm Jewish, and if conflict pertains to Jews and Palestinians, and Jews are the ones who are inflicting the violence, Palestinians are on the side that's the recipients of the violence. So I ask you a simple question, Jared. Who would you prefer to be making the case for those who are being unjustifiably persecuted? Would you prefer somebody who has, quote unquote, the right identity, or the person who has the better mastery of the facts? Who would you prefer to be making that case? In my opinion, if your concerns are truly with those who are suffering, then your first priority ought to be making the best possible case. Now, I've noticed, as you probably have noticed, since maybe the late 2000s, I was effectively canceled on the question of the Israel-Palestine conflict. I had invested 40 years to its study. I began in 1982 when Israel invaded Lebanon. I then wrote my doctoral dissertation on the topic, and I then devoted 4 decades, which, as I think you'll agree, is not a trivial amount of time in the life of a human being. And then suddenly, this identity politics emerged on the scene. And notwithstanding having written many books on the subject, and people quite qualified to render judgment, saying that I was the most knowledgeable person in the world on the subject, I was canceled. On places like Democracy Now!, you would never see me again. Instead, you would have these Palestinians, in my opinion, significantly lacking in knowledge of the subject. When I say knowledge, I'm talking about not people speaking about experiences, but people who also claim, Palestinians, who claim to have a scholarly knowledge of the subject. And I was displaced by them. In my humble opinion, I think I would have made a much stronger case. I knew the literature. I spent 4 arduous decades mastering that literature, reading thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of human rights supports, not once, not twice, many times 3 and 4 times. However, because of my quote unquote wrong identity, I was no longer in demand. Now, were it the case that these folks were more competent and qualified than me, there's no argument. There's no argument. But when Professor Said said to me, and it was a moment, he was a very serious intellectual, let there be no question about that. It was a moment in a conversation when he said a friend of mine was a racist. Why? Because in his scholarship, he doesn't cite Palestinians. I thought to myself, well, what makes citing Palestinians in and of itself a virtue? I think competence should be the standard. Ability to effectively answer the lies that Israel was disseminating. That should be the criterion if you're really concerned about those who are suffering. That's my first point. The second point there is on the Kendi chapter.
That's good.
Now,
that's definitely more than I want to watch.
yeah. Sorry to put y'all through that, but it's hilarious because it's like
shout out to Jared Ball though. I did watch that whole interview and I appreciated him on it. Yeah.
And there's a reason why people dodge Dr. Ball. There's a reason. Because he'll engage the work. And again, like when I say you don't have to lie about people, you could just let them speak for themselves. Again, if you just do the work, if you do the reading and ask simple questions, and usually it's the simple questions that are difficult, because if they're not layered, they have nowhere to run, right? And Dr. Ball was just like handing him the ball, and Norm was just like, man, embarrassing himself. I want to be specific. He says he was replaced and displaced. If you spend whatever fucking word he used, 4 decades, covering this, learning about this, mind you, never bothered to learn Hebrew, never bothered to learn Arabic, never bothered to learn. Yeah, never bothered to learn. You spent 4 decades and you're not even looking at primary sources. Like, look. Normally, I wouldn't request that of anyone or demand that of anyone. But if you're like bigging yourself up like that, if you're saying I'm this guy, you're beating your chest. I think it's a fair question to say, why didn't you learn the primary language of these sources if you spent 4 decades covering it? So again, I wouldn't ask that of anyone else. But you're making yourself to say I'm the most knowledgeable. People have said, I would never say it because I'm too humble, but people have said that I'm the most knowledgeable person about this. And you can't read the fucking primary text? How does that work? We all know that things are lost in translation. Even the best at translation, you're going to lose a little something, right? Usually it's context or whatever, or the spirit of it, what have you. Why haven't, in those 4 decades, have you learned at least one of the 2 primary languages, if this is what you've devoted your life to? I've always said that Norm Finkelstein does not give a fuck about Palestinians. Norm Finkelstein opposes, or not even opposes, is critical of the Zionist entity because it has used, the suffering of his parents to justify its atrocities. If the Zionist entity did not weaponize the Jewish identity, did not weaponize the Holocaust specifically, Norm Finkelstein would not give a fuck about Palestinians, would not pretend to care, because he doesn't. He does not. This is a personal fucking vendetta for him. This is not about Palestinians. He said he was replaced and displaced. If you spent 4 decades knowing the true material replacement and displacement that Palestinians have faced at the hands of the Zionist entity, which you claim you are not an enemy of, and you still choose to use those words to attack Palestinians, because this is what he's doing here. When he's talking about cancel culture and he's crying about not being on Democracy Now!, really? That's what you're harping on? Whatever your beef with fucking Amy Goodman is? Like, it's all personal for him. It's about his parents. It's about his relationship with Amy Goodman. That's why he spends like 50 minutes talking about Amy Goodman and her brother both went to Harvard or where the fuck they went to. And he's like, statistically speaking, the odds of siblings going to... I'm like, bro, what are you doing? It's all a vendetta. It's all personal for him. He does not care about Palestinians. So when Palestinians start getting centered and they start getting the platforms to speak for themselves, he views that as I'm being canceled. You're a fucking asshole, bro. I am too, but own it. That's why people don't want you around. If they could find somebody else that is knowledgeable and preferably can relate to the actual topic, can speak for themselves and their family members, they're going to go with that person. Maybe if we're a little bit nicer, you'd be invited as, a guest, a co-guest or whatever. But you're a fucking asshole, Norm. He knows this. We normalize that shit because he's an older white dude, so it's fucking cute, But it's not. Again, it's all personal for him. To use the words replace and displace when talking about Palestinians and making yourself out to be the victim, it's just a level of fucking to me, it's disgusting. It truly is. And if you don't mind playing, and then we can move on from Norm, or if you have something to add, but the one after that, I think this one I saw recently, and I was like, oh, like you have a disdain for Palestinians. Like you truly view yourself as their savior, as their only hope of survival. And Norm has blood on his hands for sure, because of what he's just contributed to this conversation. No, I'm sorry, not the last one in the Norm Finkelstein section. It should be right above the Emma Vigeland one.
Oh, hang on.
Yeah.
Oh, I see it now, I think.
Yeah. I don't know if we'll have time to cover the Emma Vigeland one, but that dropped like yesterday, and the way these people claim to be allies and immediately bend the knee to Zionism is pathetic.
All right.
I was there then. I met the head of Hamas at the time, Dr. Rantisi. He was eventually assassinated by Israel, as were all the other leaders of Hamas. I wasn't positively impressed. He had spent, as they all did, I guess he spent 10 years in Israeli prison. And I asked him, what did you do in prison? I read. I said, what did you read? And he looked at me as if that were a redundant question. He said, the Quran. Well, he also said he read biographies of a couple of Israeli leaders. But I thought to myself, this is not the mental universe that the moment requires, that the struggle requires. One of the things about Nasrallah, the late leader of Hezbollah, he was a voracious reader, and he read the Israeli press every day. He knew everything that was going on in Israel.
I just add quickly there, just the other day, and I don't actually know when Norm Finkelstein said this, but Louis Alday we had on, and he talked about that I guess Norman has said that Nasrallah also got his whole analysis of imperialism and Zionism's relationship with it from Chomsky during one meeting, that, you know, and he just credits the timing of this meeting with, you know, and yeah, but that which Louis was also decrying. But anyways, it relates to the things. I say that because it's connected directly to what you're showing here.
Oh, and it's such a white supremacist mentality that it took Norm Finkelstein to educate, you know, this, in his mind, for sure views people as backwards, right? The dismissal, we looked up on my stream, Dr. Rantisi, like his background. Bro graduated like first of his class, was a doctor, was teaching medicine, and he's locked up for 10 years. He's locked up in a dungeon, in a Zionist dungeon for 10 years. And Norm is dismissing the fact that he was reading the Quran. And even in his little fucking make-believe world has to acknowledge, oh, he read the biographies of his enemies. But, oh, he was reading the Quran. One, look, I'm an atheist. That is so fucking dismissive of somebody's like personal faith. I wouldn't do that. Just regardless of where they are at. But if you're spending 10 years.
Yeah, in prison, yeah.
How many people have turned to religion out of necessity to survive that psychological and physical torment, that torture? So if you're telling me that you're being dismissive for somebody spending a decade in prison, the Quran probably kept them sane, probably kept them alive. I will never deny the power that faith and religion can give someone. In fact, I'm envious of it. I can never acquire that again. It's unfortunate. I miss it. I really do. I have a playlist of fucking like hardcore fucking Christian spirituals talking about being washed in the blood of the Lamb, because it does something to me where it encourages me, it helps me out, but I unfortunately can't believe in something greater anymore. But I understand like how that can be empowering. I understand how it moves you. And to spend a decade in a Zionist dungeon and to rely on that, and for Norm Finkelstein to use that against you, to dismiss you, and to pit you against another, you know, revolutionary leader, to where you're the arbitrator of who is and who isn't ready for the moment, who is and who isn't ready to lead. While you're crying about not being on democracy now, while you're crying about not getting tenured, you're going to talk about mental fortitude. You're going to talk about, you know, having a mind capable of leading people. It's a white supremacist mindset to be a white savior to that extent. I think to any extent, but to the way Norm Finkelstein displays it, the narcissism. Shout out again to Dr. Ball covering Brianna Joy Gray, interviewing Norm Finkelstein. I don't know why she does this to herself. I mean, I'm sure it's financially beneficial. That's another conversation. But Norm is out here saying that Mamdani is a bigger threat to the establishment than the Black Panthers ever were, because not enough Black Panthers were assassinated. And again, it's the anti-Blackness. It is the Orientalism. It is the fucking. He's a fucking racist through and through, and a transphobe, to be honest. That as well. I don't follow them anymore. This Is Revolution had him on where he really spewed his transphobia. This was a few years back. I stopped watching This Is Revolution because I forget his first name, but Miles, he was bragging about living in a fucking gated community in Mexico with a bunch of white people, and I'm like, all right, bro, all right, I'm done with your fucking content. But anywho, like Norm Finkelstein is a disgusting fucking figure, and if we don't highlight the fact that there's a reason why he's pushed forward, is because of his disdain for Palestinians, is because of his, white supremacist, white savior mentality. That's the reason why he's the largest voice. And when you look at figures like Katie Halper and yes, Brianna Joy Gray, figures that, push him forward, they're contributing to that. And I know he's been in other like more lefty channels. Like there's this Indian like communist channel that, conducts great interviews. Maybe they're not tapped into who Norm Finkelstein is. But these figures like Katie Halper, like Brianna Joy Gray, they know exactly who Norm Finkelstein is. And look, I'll give credit where it's due. The Majority Report, their claim is that they don't invite Norm Finkelstein because he's a transphobe. I don't know how true that is because they've had other transphobes on. I think it's more because they are kind of protective of their audience, of being too critical of the Zionist entity, despite Norm Finkelstein being a liberal Zionist. But if that's what they're saying, sometimes you got to take people for their word and give them whether they deserve it or not. Say, all right, that's what it is. If that's what you're telling your audience, at least you're letting your audience know that he's a transphobe. I wish you cared enough to be like, oh, he's also a white savior. Oh, he's also maybe you want to call him an extreme liberal Zionist. Cool. Still a fucking Zionist. But apparently that's just getting reworded because Bernie Sanders came out and said, I'm not a Zionist. I don't know if you saw that Axios interview. Did you catch it?
Oh, I did not. No, I did not.
It's in the. I don't know if you want to pull it up right now, but it's in the. I added it to the document at the end where it says Bernie. It's the Axios one, and when he's asked about being a Zionist, he goes, "No, I'm not a Zionist." When he was literally glowing, bro, he was like his eyes were glistening, remembering his time in the kibbutz. It's like how are these people real? And Emma Vigeland from the Majority Report has literally said, "I don't think Bernie's a Zionist. I don't think he's aggressively anti-Palestinian enough to be a Zionist." And I'm like, these people are trying to set the bar the same way that having a fucking Nazi tattoo, a white supremacist tattoo, is not sufficient for you to be a fucking white supremacist anymore. You believing that the Zionist entity has the right to exist, opposing a one-state solution, which is already a liberal fucking position, because you want European Jewish supremacy, reminiscing about kibbutz, which are fucking settler colonial outposts. Like all these things don't make you a Zionist, then what does? And it's the same thing where liberals, unless you're wearing a fucking Klan hood and burning a cross in somebody's front yard, they're like, I don't know, maybe he's redeemable. Reactionaries, Republicans will tell you, nah, he's not racist. It's just a joke. Liberals will be like, how was his childhood? Was he working class? Like shit like that, where I'm like, bro, like there is no bottom. They will always lower the standards and normalize the worst fucking people in order to not even gain power, in order to feel safe and comfortable, to maintain the illusion. Because these people have no skin in the game, often quite literally. But in terms of like their class position, they all grew up fairly affluent, if not outright rich. And so they don't give a fuck. This is all a show. This is all performative. These are the failures. When you look at people like Hasan Piker, Sam Seder, they all failed to live up to their potential. And this is where they're at. In a lot of ways, when I tell people, like, if you know about my background, like, I'm very fortunate to be here, to be able to have these conversations. These people have failed. They didn't live up to their potential. When they got the education they did, when they had the financial support that they did, when they had the connections that they did, to end up doing essentially what we're doing, yeah, at a higher level, but we're all on the same platform. We're all fucking political commentators to one extent or another. And these people had some of the best educations. And it's because they didn't make it on MSNBC. It's because they didn't make it, in Hollywood. I think Sam Seder wanted to be a fucking script writer like Ben Shapiro. That's my rant. But yeah, there's yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I'm thinking about is whether Hasan really falls into that category, because I think he's going to end up making more money probably like doing the work that you're talking about than he might if he had been on network TV in
It's
the
the
long
sad.
run.
No, you're right, but it's the saddest. It's the saddest that it comes with it. He was recently denied entry to the VIP section of Mamdani's like celebration party or whatever the fuck. I don't know why Breakthrough News was out there when they're a branch of the PSL, but I guess they're trying to celebrate any win. But he got denied entry to Mamdani's like VIP section because, you know, he's just a fucking streamer at the end of the day. And he tried saying, "Oh, well, I have 70,000 people watching." And he's trying to pull the, "Do you know who I am?" It's like, yeah, they know exactly who you are, and they know they don't have to take you that seriously because you're not part of the established, respectable media. All these people want to be there, even though it's
Yeah.
dying, even though they know they have their audience will support them better than any institutionalized like media will, but they want the status. That's why Sam Cedar was crying when he was fired from MSNBC as a contributor. He was crying for his job back. And have some self fucking respect. The moment that Chris Hayes is like, "Hey, you could, cover for me. I'm gonna go on vacation." Sam Cedar's there. And now Emma Viglin's getting invited to the MSNBC, so the Pod Save Americas. This is somebody who was saying that in terms of the fires in Hawaii, Emma Viglin said, Joe Biden should have been there. It's our 50th state. If we're gonna colonize them, we might as well like treat them right. And also Puerto Rico. Like that is their position is we want nice colonialism. And it makes sense why they have that position in terms of the Zionist entity. They want to see the end of the apartheid when apartheid is just a tool of settler colonialism. If you remove apartheid, you still have settler colonialism. Look at South Africa. The people that still own the resources, that own capital, are still colonizers. But everything, it's not on the books anymore. It's not the law anymore. So that's progress. They want to see the Zionist entity go the way of South Africa. They want to see the Zionist entity go the way of the US so they could normalize that shit. Right? Because for them, it's all about aesthetics. It's not about the actual substance. Because if they actually combated and were against settler colonialism, they'd have to confront the reality of their position as settlers here. They can't do that. They lack that self-awareness, or they fear being self-critical and what it means of what they have to do moving forward to be real allies, to be real comrades, to actually support colonized people. They'll never do that. They never have. So for them, this is a career move. Emma Viglin's entire family is like lawyers for like big corporations that work like with the Democratic Party and the government. She's a failure. Hasan Piker, his mom was like a landlord, like a corporate landlord. His dad was involved with like the Turkish government and also was like a CEO of some corporation. For him to end up being a streamer, to only have a bachelor's degree, they all love bragging about their bachelor's. Bro, if you grew up like that with that type of wealth, a bachelor's degree is like should be viewed like a high school degree. Like that's what you should be getting. You should have a master's, you should have a doctorate because you had access to all this fucking education and financial support. So that's what I mean. It's the status, not so much the money. It's how you make the money for them, right? And I think they're all failures in that sense. And we need to stop like glorifying these fucking people because they feel it. They feel it when they're around people that went about it the right way, right? They have to make their own way because, I mean, there is no bar of entry to do this. You can just start doing it. And even then, every door was open to them because of their connections, either familial or like business wise. Sam Cedar hired Emma Viglin because of her family connections to the DNC. It's that simple. What were we talking about, Bernie?
Well, I want to stay on Norm for a second because I to be honest, like I didn't read the Identity Politics book because I just could tell like I would not be able to stand it. I mean, I do have, I guess, what I would describe as a nuanced critique of identity politics. I don't like it being discussed as like a just even the term itself, right? And using it to talk about something that we think is like Because the way it gets used, right, is like, oh, don't do that, like, or those people are just doing identity politics, right? Like, so it gets used as a very dismissive thing, and it gets used very often to sideline like any concern that has to do with race, gender, sexuality, immigration status, national identity, all of those things. eh, like you and I would both agree, and I know just because I've watched enough of your content, right? And we, this gets in even to the discussion, like the surrounded, the Jubilee thing that you did, the debate show, right? Of like, there are certain forms where people use identity in a kind of counterinsurgent fashion, as a part of co-optation, as a part of being a comprador, or neocolonialism and all of these things. And like, it's really important for us to have an analysis of those various things and try to be able to sense when it happens. And I appreciate you as somebody who calls it out, because also I think it can be difficult for people to call it out, and you have to be sharp with your analysis if you're going to call it out, right? Because there's a lot of pitfalls, I think, of kind of calling it out in the wrong way. And with Norman Finkelstein in that conversation with Jared Ball, like, I thought Dr. Ball was doing a really good job of saying to him, look, like, I agree with some of the things that you are saying, right? Like, I have my criticisms of Angela Davis as well. I have my criticisms of Black Lives Matter, organization as well, or of limits of some of these movements or forms of action, et cetera, right? However, like, you're not citing or engaging with any of the people to your left in the Black revolutionary tradition, who have also made critiques of these figures from Black radical tradition, whatever we want to call it, right? But like a position to the Black folks from the left of Angela Davis, or to the left of BLM, etc., having their critiques of how certain movements and figures are engaged in liberalism, or forms of status quo politics, or kind of conveyor belts into the Democratic Party, right? These sorts of things, which is funny too, right? Because Norman is also like such a conveyor belt into the Democratic Party. I mean, he's like right there doing it. Like, that's what he's doing right now all the time. And in some, I mean, like, his criticism of prison abolition is that, like, that she shouldn't be talking about that until you get to full communism, which is like, okay, I actually might somewhat, we could have a discussion about that, but like, there is an element to me where I've always thought of prison abolition as a horizon, as talking about like that kind of society, because it's like, what kind of society could you create where you wouldn't need to put anybody in a prison, right? It has to be one where like all needs are met, where people have what they need, where, et cetera, right? Um, so I appreciated Jared, like, especially in that conversation, kind of, making that point ultimately. And it's similar just in some of those comments that he makes. I mean, obviously there's like the kind of obvious racism and sort of European civilizational discourses that just sort of come out about and elevating himself as a scholar and all of this. And I'm not saying that he's not a serious scholar, but like, I have a few books behind me right now that, thankfully, to folks like Louis Alday and others, like, are translated into English, that were written in Arabic, right? And if he hadn't, they weren't at the time that Norman Finkelstein was doing his research, but if he had read The Foundation of Zionism, which is written by a Palestinian, right, then he would obviously have a ton of stuff to be able to cite, right, from Palestinian scholars. So it's like, this is the thing about that kind of dismissal, right, is that there's so much wonderful work that has been done by folks from the Palestine Research Center, which was the kind of revolutionary intellectual arm of the PLO, and others from prior generations and currently, right? That if you are not, like, you wouldn't cite it, of course, if you don't speak Arabic, right? Because and I don't, So I'm not also sitting here like from that position of like, oh, I know it. Like I know some of these books because now they're translated into English, right? Some of them I still need to read. But still, to put yourself up as like I'm the foremost expert of this, and you can't even read most of what Palestinians have written on the subject because they're not writing it in fucking English, bro. Like, get over yourself, you know? So yeah, I mean that strikes me a particular kind of way, but I think that like those like all of that orientation to me is consistent, right? And the other thing about the identity politics thing that bothers me is that he is platformed because of identity politics, right? Like it's just the fact that he is Jewish and that he is white, those are the identity politics that lead to his excessive platforming, right? And look, I think there should be Jewish voices. I think there should be even critical Israeli voices. I think there should be Israeli voices that are, John Brown, right? We don't see that, right? I'm not opposed to the existence of the discourse and to the people having the contradictions and the debates and people critiquing and debating and all of that stuff. But to go to that level of putting yourself forward as like, I'm the foremost advocate for these colonized people whose language I don't speak. And, like it's just, it's bananas, and to do the same thing kind of on, like it's similar to the things he said about MLK versus, like the Panthers and the Black Power movement and all of this stuff, where he's saying, well, ultimately, like everybody to the left of MLK, like didn't matter, right? So it is a very, it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about these platforms and kind of what they're doing, that he would be perfect for a lot of them because that's the same kind of thing that they want to do is they want to pick some spot, right, where it's like, okay, this is where the perfect progressivism is or whatever we want to call it, right? And like nothing to the left of it matters, and therefore we're not going to take seriously anti-imperialism. We're not going to take seriously anti-Zionism in some kind of principled way. We may talk a little bit about those things and rebrand it to mean, like you were saying, like what is palatable or marketable within the left flank of the Democratic Party. But there's a real, gatekeeping and sheepdogging operation going on around those things. So anyway, man, again, I appreciate what you're doing around that stuff. And yeah, we can go to Bernie, or if you have any
Yeah,
response
just
to that.
quickly on that to highlight, because often it gets so normalized, but the anti-blackness of it, right? He wrote that book, and again, I encourage everyone to go watch Dr. Ball's conversation with him. This should highlight just what an absolute racist piece of shit he is. He has this standard for Palestinians. You have to know this much in order to speak above me, in order to speak, correctly. And then, again, simple questions that Dr. Ball asked, and you realize that North Finkelstein did not engage with, yes, Black radical scholars at all. And he thought that he could walk into this Black academic space and be like, oh, this is what you're missing. This is what you have wrong. I'm here to tell you how to properly criticize this, and don't fall for this. Let me expose the truth for you. When as Dr. Ball, and please go watch the interview, everyone, highlights like, yo, like there's a legacy of people already calling this shit out. It's just to your left. And so to not have the same standards for yourself that you would for others when they are talking about their own struggle, for me, highlights that white supremacist mindset to be like, oh, I could just walk into any room, pick up a few books, and I'm the new fucking savior here. That's because you don't respect the actual people themselves, right? And you're absolutely correct. I mean, that you're making me laugh because I'm like, yeah, like it is completely ridiculous to say you're the most expert of something that you can't fucking read. Palestinians learn Hebrew in fucking these dungeons, in these Zionist dungeons. They learn Hebrew. What the fuck is your excuse, Norm? What has been your excuse for 4 decades? But yeah, we can move on to the other Zionist, the other glorified Zionist of the left.
I mean, I will say, thankfully, that Bernie doesn't get any flowers or coverage over here, and mostly, I another person that I like to ignore as much as possible. But yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting. I mean, it is important, and I think that this is the thing, and this is part of what I was talking about earlier of the contradictions of our own kind of stance around a lot of this stuff, is that by just going and doing our own thing, not that many people, as you said, most people aren't watching us, right? And that's absolutely true. And none of these folks we're talking to take us seriously as a platform, and that's fine. Like, I wouldn't go on their shows anyway, right? But the but the app to like regular people coming in and getting introduced to the left over the last 10 years, right? These are the places that people, kind of step into first a lot of the time. They kind of get acclimated to. And to a lot of people who are, I also think it plays a specific role for liberals.
Mm.
Because I think if you grow up liberal and then you get introduced to people who are like to the left of you in the Democratic Party, and you're like, oh, like these people actually have a critique of capitalism, and I would say it's a critique that is not actually anti-capitalist, but it's a kind of, we need to rein in the oligarchy and corporations and all of this stuff. But that becomes kind of like as far as you go, and also because of what you're talking about in terms of how they just really won't engage with people to their left or even talk about people to their left, which I actually think also is the reason Jared Ball has often brought up that like none of these people will talk about political prisoners. Right. And I
Fuck.
think that the
Yeah.
reason that they won't talk about political prisoners is because most political prisoners are significantly to their left. Right. It's not like it could be oh, this is adventurism, blah, blah, blah. But I don't actually think it's that. I think it's that they know that if they brought some of these people on or had conversations with them, it would introduce them, people to politics that are, very different actually than the ones that they have, and so. All right, let me pull up the video.
And we're gonna work a little bit backwards the way that I have him lined up to highlight that
Yep.
he's been fairly consistent with his Zionism.
All right, is this the first one, the
Yeah.
Axios one?
This is the most recent one, yeah.
Hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to defeat you. And in some cases, they've been successful.
Your family has faced anti-Semitism in its history. Your father fled Poland in the 1920s, violent anti-Semitism. Your uncle was in a ghetto and was killed by the Nazis. I'm curious how that family history has shaped your views of Israel. And
Well, let me
Gaza.
add something to it. When I was a kid, I was in Israel for, I can't remember, 3 or 4 months, worked on several kibbutzim. I was very impressed with what I saw. Was very excited at the formation when I was a kid, the formation of the state of Israel. More than aware of the Holocaust, and which took people in my own family, and the horrible anti-Semitism that existed then exists today in America. So I'm proudly Jewish, but that does not mean in any way, shape,
We're gonna
or
have to talk
form
about
that I will
anti-Semitism.
support a right-wing extremist government in Israel that is doing horrific things to the Palestinian people.
Would you consider yourself a Zionist?
No, not within the terms of what Zionism means. No.
You talked about anti-Semitism in
Yeah, that's
this.
And I felt a little crazy when I was first going after Sam Seder for his attempt to redefine what anti-Zionism means. I'm like, damn, am I really doing too much? Like, what's going on? But I'm like, no, like it starts somewhere. This redefining of words is part of the process. And now you have a lifelong Zionist who, I don't know. Am I tripping, or did you see his smile when he started talking about the kibbutzim?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like
No. That was genuine. And honestly, like, there's a similar thing within Chomsky. In one of his, it's an interview, and people bring it up sometimes of, him actually talking about how his vision of socialism is based on the time that he spent on the kibbutz, right? And yeah.
So one of the people that I'm pretty sure they still have me blocked, the Vanguard, these two white dudes from like the Midwest, they had Marianne Williamson on, and I have the clip, but she starts spewing these lies about the origins of the Zionist entity. And I pushed back afterwards, like, hey, why didn't you like challenge her on this when you had the correct position? And they just start rambling, making excuse after excuse of like, well, I was just trying to give the other side a devil's advocate that, you can make the argument that it started as a spiritual, a pilgrimage and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, spiritual Zionism is a thing, but it's still a Zionism. And they're like, no, but, and again, I always refer to like Chicanismo and Chicano nationalists as like brown Zionists, the same thing. Aslan is not a physical place; it's a spiritual place. Is the same type of settler colonial myth making. And it got to the point that I kept challenging on them, where I'm like, bro, the kibbutz weren't, because they referenced Chomsky. Chomsky talked about how his anarchist syndicalism was influenced by the kibbutz, this and that. Young Jewish people like, living in co-ops, this and that. And I'm like, is Jamestown a co-op? Everyone was working on it. The wives, the kids, the husbands, they all had work to do in these settler colonial outposts. So is that influencing your socialism? No, of course not. Your anarchism? Of course it isn't. Like, let's stop. These are settler colonial outposts. Look, he's a little off the deep end right now, Max Blumenthal. Maybe he always was, but in his book Goliath, he does a pretty decent job highlighting how these kibbutz all came to be, usually under the cover of night. Zionists would just run down and, literally, like, if they were like, it always reminded me of like gold miners, because I'm out here in California, so we learn a lot about like the people mining gold. That they were rushed to plant their little flags to be like, this is my block, and that's what it reminded me of, the kibbutz. Like, in the middle of the night, they would run down and they would start posting things to be like, this is our area now. We just stole a bunch of land. I don't care how they're fucking operating inside of it. I really don't. I don't care how. I kind of do. I would say I kind of do. I'm not gonna lie. I think there is value in learning how they operate for sure. But to glorify it is utter complete bullshit. And so they start pushing this line because of Chomsky. And you start seeing how these, liberal Zionists or left Zionists start to spread their propaganda. And you have complete idiots that want to align with white supremacy, like the Vanguard, Zach and Gavin, push that forward. And it got to the point to where they literally ended up blocking me by saying, I think it's fair to say that there were some Zionist, leaders, some founders of Israel that had good intentions. They just went about it the wrong way. That's how these two white dudes from the Midwest were talking about settler colonialism. And like, for me, that drives me fucking crazy, because I'm like, you're a white supremacist. I don't give a fuck if you know. I don't care if you know that you're promoting Zionist propaganda. I don't care whether or not you know or recognize that you're supporting white supremacy. Because the worst part is you think you're being intelligent by quoting Chomsky, by referencing Chomsky. I don't know if it's self-preservation. I don't know if it's just, unconscious alignment with white supremacy. I don't know, and I don't care. Because at the end of the day, the material effect that you're having is spreading this propaganda to your larger audience. And silencing and pushing away and ridiculing, like making me seem like I was crazy for pushing back against it. And what do they do post October 7th? They try to profit off the genocide of Palestinians. And it's like, this is why I find these people to be abhorrent, disgusting, and insidious, and need to be challenged. At the very least, their allegiance to white supremacy and settler colonialism has to be documented. The video that I'm currently working on, Grand Plattner, I'm literally starting off the video with, a collection of all the excuses that I didn't know what that was. I'm not an expert in Nazi symbolism to know what that was. The third most popular Nazi symbol. The first is the swastika. The second is the SS Thunderbolts. The third is the Tonkopf, the death skull. Literally the emblem on top of like SS soldiers' hats. Let's stop pretending. But every single one of them making excuses. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. And again, I think this is in the video I talk about white ignorance in attempt to gain white innocence. And this is your job. This is your career. You chose to do this. Nobody forced you into this space. You were busy calling Trump and everyone in his cabinet fascist, 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 white supremacist this, white supremacist that, and you're financially benefiting from that. And you're not even engaging with like white supremacist symbolism. I used to work, I joke around at a not so mom and pop shop coffee place. And there was this guy, I was along a freeway and he was a trucker. We had people from all around the country and big white dude, big beard. And I saw tattoos, this and that. Something rubbed me the wrong way. He used to go by Rick. And then out of nowhere, he started coming in and he started saying that his name was Thor. And I'm like, oh, this guy's a fucking not like straight up white supremacist. I'm like, dope. But I had no evidence. And all my coworkers at the time were like, this Carlos is fucking crazy, whatever. Right. And so I didn't tell him quite yet until I had to have proof. Usually with older white people, I like to poke at them a little bit and get the racism out just by asking simple questions again. I used to have a coworker who she's a white woman, but grew up in the Czech Republic. And so she didn't have this concept of racism the way that we do because she grew up around other white people. So she wasn't really confronted with it. Definitely not American style racism. So I would just poke people, like, ask them simple questions and they would fucking like just let it out. And she would always be shocked. And so I would try doing the same with this guy, but he was just a wall, wouldn't give me any reaction. And then one day he's wearing shorts and usually he would walk out and leave to his truck. But this time, for whatever reason, he sits down across, from the bar area and I could see his knee, and on his knee was the black sun. Right now, if you were to tell me I didn't know what the black sun was, I would believe you. Because it looks like a badass fucking rock and roll symbol, if we're being honest. It does not look like Nazi iconography. A fucking skull. We all know what a skull is. It means death. Anywho. Bernie Sanders. Yeah. So there's normalization of white supremacy on the left, whether it's Zionist or now neo-Nazi, apparently, is so frustrating and alarming because as things get worse, as we encroach further and further into barbarism, we're in it. People are living on the streets. We're just normalizing it. But as the affluent white left gets more and more uncomfortable, they will compromise and align further with whiteness and white supremacy and fascism. It's a cliche to say scratch a liberal and a fascist leads, but we're seeing it in real time. Like they're literally defending a white supremacist symbol. And they're claiming that they're too stupid to know. They're too dumb to know. How could they possibly know? Well, that's because either you don't take it seriously or you're cool with it. Either way, you're normalizing it. But yeah, and this is part of it. Zionism is white supremacy. I know like Norm Finkelstein is pushing this whole Jewish supremacy. Bullshit. As African Jews, where there's Jewish supremacy. They're colonizers too. Don't get me wrong. They're colonizers too. However, they're being, forced sterilized because they want to maintain not a Jewish majority, a European Jewish majority. They don't want too many black or brown people there. They don't give a fuck if they're Jewish or not. Look at the Israeli Black Panthers, which is a disgusting name, but they were Sephardic Jews from the neighboring areas. The Zionist entity needed numbers. Every settler colonial project needs people, needs bodies to put out there and to occupy literal space from the indigenous population. And then they realize, oh, wait, we're all Jewish, but you're treating us like garbage. You're not helping us. So the socialism, the national socialism isn't being extended to us. So we're going to create the Israeli Black Panthers to fight for our rights as settlers. And it's like, bro, like, what more evidence do you need that it's not about Jewish supremacy first and foremost? It might be secondary or third, but it wasn't about Catholic supremacy when the Spanish conquistadors did it. It wasn't about Protestant supremacy first and foremost here. It was about white supremacy. It was about the white man's, mission from God. And it's the same thing with the Zionist entity. Same fucking thing. And so it's frustrating to see the conflation of what it is. And it's not American supremacy. It's not Jewish supremacy. It's white supremacy. That's what trumps all this shit. Because at the end of the day, the Zionist entity could fall, the U.S. could fall. They'll still, embrace white supremacy regardless. And I do think the U.S. has eventually become balkanized. I'm a little jaded in that regard. But yeah.
I mean, I would say that would be great. Yeah, I mean, I guess so I don't disagree with you on the white supremacy point. The only thing that I would add to it from my perspective is that, to me, understanding Zionism, that it's fundamental to understand the role that it plays for Western imperialism, right? And so, like, yeah, like in terms of who, the hierarchy within the society, and also, the civilizational affinity that exists in the kind of, like, the white supremacist, um, yeah, European civilizational project, I guess, like we could say that obviously this is a big part of that project, and of why it looks the way it does, and why its policies are shaped the way that they are, and all of that. I do think, like, if it wasn't useful to empire, or if empire determined that the costs in doing it were greater than the rewards, that you would see a policy shift on it. Like, just to give examples, like, I think that's ultimately the history of South African apartheid in a lot of ways. I think it's an interesting, like, so there's other settler colonial histories, right, where we could look to, right, where they say, okay, y'all are getting a little bit out of hand. We either have to fight about it, or we're going to, like, just stop supporting you all, and you have to figure it out on your own. Whereas, I am convinced that the US and Western Europe in particular see Zionism as existentially necessary to their own global dominance. Which, yeah, I mean, like, if people want to analyze that through the lens of white supremacy on a global scale, I'm not averse to that. But I think ultimately, from my perspective, it is also about the accumulation of capital and the maintenance of a certain system of how capital flows from the global south to the north.
No, to be very clear, and you just helped me realize that sometimes I get a little too hyped, and I don't make the distinctions clear enough. I'm saying the connective tissue is white supremacy, but the motivational force is absolutely, capital and resource accumulation, without question. And yes, they will sacrifice each other, and they will suddenly make somebody not white. Or, I mean, look at the way that, again, Ukraine, they're white, and they're just throwing them into the fucking to the meat grinder, because it benefits capital, it benefits their, geopolitical strategies, without question. And yeah, the Zionist entity is in a place, in a location that is too valuable to abandon, for sure. Whereas South Africa, one, Mandela was a fucking comprador. He sold out. So was it really a defeat, or just, again, changing in the aesthetic formation of it? So I think they'll make compromises, but in terms of defeat, I think that is a little bit more of a nuanced conversation, because I do view, and this is why all these fucking radlibs are asking for a Palestinian Mandela, or when they're like, stop incarcerating Palestinians who are promoting nonviolence, and you'll get your Palestinian Mandela. And it's like, why would you want a Mandela anything? That just highlights that you don't know, the history of South Africa, and how Mandela sold out the charter. I'm blanking out right now, but my apologies. But yeah, like Mandela, I don't know. Like, for me, I think they were willing to abandon South Africa, because apartheid South Africa, because they knew that they had a figure who was willing to abandon true revolutionary decolonization. But I'm also need to be more educated in that area.
Yeah, I need to spend more time on it as well. And I think the only thing I would add from my own perspective is that the 90s are just a fuck. Like because of the fall of the Soviet Union, and people can have different opinions about that, but the reality of it as a kind of global realpolitik is like that, having the Soviet Union, having a socialist bloc allowed alternative bases of support, right? And backers for different types of anti-colonial movements, right? And after the Soviet Union falls, I think it's somewhat, in my view, and again, because I haven't studied it well enough, maybe Mandela is fully, can be read totally as a sellout, and all of that. I know I do understand some of the contradictions, some of the things that he did for sure. But also I look at the 90s a lot as a period in which the it's hard to say whether it's fully the propaganda around the idea that there is no alternative just becomes so seductive that it takes hold in a lot of ways, because also you can point to things like Venezuela or Zapatismo or other movements that arise in the 90s posing different ways of moving, and still, anyway, it's a whole different discussion. But the point being that, you look at Northern Ireland, you look at the South Africa, you look at Oslo, you look at the accords that are signed within Yugoslavia and across Eastern Europe and so on, like that, you know, it was a time where movements felt compromised and made compromises, and yeah, I mean, it's worth. I think we've been talking about it a while on here. I think it's like worth a whole series at some point about like each of the peace accords, and like what how deeply can you study them and critique them. I think in hindsight we can all say that for all of them, you know, it if people thought that those were paths forward that would help them out, we can all say that like that didn't work. Right? So it's like in the context of the time, I think it was a little bit more believable for some of these groups that like, okay, we're going to try this and maybe it will allow us to maneuver in a different way and keep our stuff moving forward, and we can, attack these systems or whatever in a different way. And, that didn't happen.
Yeah, that is definitely a larger conversation, because I do know there was also like, critics of those figures that were
Sure,
compromising. I always talk
absolutely.
about like, yeah, like for me, like we dehumanize what compromising means so much. Like for example, right now with the whole SNAP benefits being removed for was it 42 days or something like that? People are saying, well, we had to get SNAP back, we had to get people paid again because they were suffering this and that. Again, I try not to indulge too much into the circus of it all, the performance, the kabuki theater of it, and but it's like, wait, one, I grew up on these programs. I'm fortunate enough now not to need them, but I literally needed them to live as a kid. So this isn't something foreign or alien to me, and I'm not that far removed from it. Like I'm not in a secure position economically, living paycheck to paycheck and all that stuff. So it's not foreign to me. However, when you make compromises and you're saying no, we're focused on the immediate, and you're making compromises with these fucking animals, in the long run, you're still going to get screwed over anyways. And the sacrifices were for what? And I use this example of the government shutdown because it's kind of relatable, it's easy to understand, and it's current. Democrats made people suffer for 42 days for what? For nothing. They're not gaining anything from the Republican Party. But their excuse is people are hungry, people are struggling. Yeah, and they're going to struggle and be, in a more difficult situation afterwards in the long run. After you already made them suffer in the short run, in the long run, they're screwed either way. In the immediate future, some people will be helped, but we understand that this compromise literally means people starving, literally means people going homeless, people being forgotten about, and that suffering becomes normalized. And so that's my issue with while at the same time participating in very practical work that requires, demands, yeah, which is what keeps me really angry and frustrated at all times, because I see how much is left on the table, and how desperate people need it and how much they're working. I know you said you have a heart out. I don't know if you want to
Yeah, we got
continue on the
about
burn, or if
we
you
got
want
about
to.
30 minutes. We got about
Yeah, if
30
you want to
minutes
tell
left.
also the majority report, the little debate that I had with them. I always like to highlight that because it just really does highlight the way that these people pretend to be, allies to Palestinians while speaking out of both sides of their mouth.
Is it the first one of the majority report ones?
Let's see here.
You got
let me make sure.
two there, it looks like.
Yeah, I got two. Let me make sure the first one is the accurate one. I don't know why it's being weird. Okay, yeah, it should be the first one. It should be the first one. So this is gonna be the setup.
That is saying is anti-Semitic in and of itself, but I just think that it's just simply wrong. Rotten the Pig says, if you're not anti-Zionist if you believe that Israel has a right to exist. Do you believe Israel has a right to exist? I don't know about that.
Yeah, how?
I mean, well, no. Like, I believe Israel has the right to exist. I just don't think it can exist as a Jewish state as opposed to a democratic one. Like, I mean, I think, you're, and I think we'll probably have a guest on in this in terms of like, the definition of Zionism is sometimes can be a little bit like sort of evasive. I don't know that I've ever really considered myself anti-Zionist per se. But if being a Zionist is to support Israel as it is currently configured, fundamentally so, that we have a tier of second-class citizens, and then also maintaining what is now appears to be a permanent occupation, not annexation, then yes, I am an anti-Zionist. But I don't think that Israel should disappear. I don't think that they're like it, but
or even like, we don't advocate for people being removed. What we want is, I think, what like Pappy and a lot of people, Jeff Halper of the Israeli Committee Against Housing Demolition, they say one state, democratic, and like I personally am like, if we can help that.
I love that they're deciding what gets to happen.
Peace in it, which is what the original project should have been. The world was too nationalistic at that time to really do that.
Yes.
And we were too obsessed with borders. I mean, India was being partitioned at the same time. Like that's the world that this was formed in. If we could go back in time and say, yes, we're going to but we're not going to be expelling anybody because of demographics, and things like that, then all the money we've spent to Israel to like actually create a state that's safe for both Jewish people and Palestinians would be great.
Yeah, I mean, when people ask the question, does Israel have the right to exist? Of course it does. Of course people in Israel have the right to safety. Of course, like, because it does exist. And because people live there.
Conflate those
That's why they
things?
have the right. Because saying that it doesn't exist would mean expelling, 9 million Israelis that live there? No. The point, though, is that does it have the right to exist in a way that is a permanent apartheid state and an occupation?
I never understand why anybody thinks that states have rights to exist, or
no rights, like don't have rights of movement, don't have rights to drive on certain roads. Only Israelis have that right. Don't have rights over their water supply, over their electricity, over their futures, and I mean, no. Israel does have a right to exist and should exist because it does. But it needs to also include the rights of Palestinians. That is the central question here. And so when people ask that question, oftentimes they're asking, does it have the right to exist in an exclusionary way? And I would say that is a violation of international law in the way that it has been conducting its business.
Let's turn to Speaker Mike Johnson.
Thank you.
So a whole lot in that, right?
Yeah.
Man.
I mean, I'll just say a couple things. I mean,
please.
I always appreciate the Fred Moten discussion on this, and just the importance of lifting up the reality that, like, states don't have rights, like, that people do, right? And, you know, um, but, just this specific, and he talks about this, like, the specific demand around Israel's right to exist, right? Which is something that doesn't get invoked for anybody. Like, nobody right now is saying, hey, Venezuela has a right to exist. Like, yeah, like, but the and just to be clear, all solidarity with Venezuela, and I fuck all those boats in the fucking Caribbean Sea from the US military. But this notion, right? I mean, there could be some kind of discourse around state rights within some kind of framework of, like, does a state have a right to be a part of the United Nations, or does a state have a right to trade, or like, something like this, right? But the notion that, as we've seen so many times historically, that states become formed, they change, they dissolve, they become replaced, they, like, I mean, for people who, like, really follow Marx all the way through, at some point he wants them to go away, and Lenin talked about withering away and all of this, right? But, like, this notion that it becomes this permanent feature that has rights in the way that those, you know, and this specifically comes up with Israel as the primary site for this. What Moten's pointing out is that the struggle around an advocacy for Israel's right to exist is actually also a struggle around all nation states around the same kind of concept. And emblematically it gets used. And again, this is part of also the Holocaust industry, also, just, and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah. Anyway, there's a lot more to go into there. I mean, yeah.
No, I'm definitely gonna have to read up on more of Moulton, you said?
Oh, Fred Moten. I could send you,
Fred Moulton.
like, we did a
Please,
conversation
please.
with him around it, and then yeah.
Yeah, because of this, I called in and, like, debated all of them, and trying to get them to understand what I was saying, specifically Sam Seder. He helped bring about Michael Brooks, who I think is, like, the most overrated fucking great white hope, the online left has ever seen. Tragic that he died so young. I actually got to meet him, and he was very he failed my test when I asked him a question about settler colonialism, but he was very kind and very welcoming. So, I mean, on a human level, respect to him. And it's tragic when anyone passes away so young, but overrated as fuck. But he loved Mark Fisher and settler capitalism and all this stuff, and the Vampire Castle, all this shit. I always thought Mark Fisher was a little too like pop art for me, but I understand that it's accessible. And because of that, in the midst of the debate, I don't know, coined or came up with the phrase settler realism. And I think it relates to what you were just saying right now, in the sense that I'm saying the same way that Mark Fisher was saying that capitalism has just captured our imagination completely, right? Our reality, or what we perceive to be reality. So much so that we can't imagine a world without it. In fact, it's easier for us to imagine the apocalypse and the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And that's why he relates this to all these catastrophic films, post-apocalyptic films. My argument is, with settler realism, is it's easier for the colonizer to imagine the complete extermination of the indigenous population, than it is for them to imagine the collapse of the settler colonial project itself. Most of that out of self-preservation and fear of what happens when I'm not in control, what happens when I don't benefit, of the stealing of land and resources and the taking of indigenous life. That's what I try to, like, argue. But in terms of Moulton, like, I like that, because I really do want to, like, put pen to paper and actually contribute something more than these streams at some point, and settle realism. Thanks to this, debate, I have a clip of it here. But my response to this was, one, you're already redefining what anti-Zionist means. The question was, you're not anti-Zionist if you believe Israel has a right to exist, do you believe Israel has a right to exist? Immediately, Sam Seder starts questioning that, trying to muddy the waters for his audience to say, well, it's complicated what anti-Zionism means. I don't think that Israel should disappear, is what he says, which immediately means that you are a Zionist. Whatever follows after defines what type of Zionist you are, because we know that there's different types. There's spiritual Zionists, there's Orthodox Zionists, they're liberal, all these branches of Zionism have always existed. And he goes on to start saying, well, if it means supporting the Zionist entity Israel as it is today, then I'm against it. Fundamentally so. But if we change it, we alter it, if we change the aesthetics of it, then suddenly he's not an anti-Zionist. His producer, Matt Legg, who we just hear his voice, immediately, and he's done this repeatedly, he always references, and this goes to Norm Finkelstein, Ilan Pappé, who is an Israeli, Jeff Halper, who's also an Israeli. Jeff Halper admitted, because they always, I don't know why they love Jeff Halper. He's admitted that he was an adult when he went to the Zionist entity, and that he immediately recognizes that I didn't have rose-tinted glasses on. I knew what this was. And he still went. And he's still there. But because he's advocating for this weird kind of like one state where, people get to move back in. But if you read his actual fucking book, I think it's Decolonizing Palestine, Liberating Israel, or some shit like that. One, it was supposed to be co-written with a Palestinian. Not included in the book. I don't know what the fallout was, what happened, what disagreement occurred to where they couldn't co-write this. But whoever he was going to work with that was Palestinian didn't commit to writing that book. So it just becomes this colonizer writing about the decolonization of Palestine. If you continue reading, he says, well, unfortunately, some of the villages that were destroyed, we've built forests or done amusement parks over them, so they're not going to be able to rebuild the villages, but there's enough empty land. So basically saying, nah, I'm your ally, but I don't support you destroying what we build upon the destroyed villages, your villages. What if Palestinians do want to return to home and rebuild as they have the right to? What if they're like, no, like we're going to rebuild what you destroyed? And Jeff Halper's over here saying, don't worry, there's more empty land. Empty land is always, the best land does not get left empty. All right. Like, it's never been the case. Colonizers do not preserve shit. All right. Despite like national parks, this and that, Sam Seder, shout out to Sam Seder for saying that he thinks he opposes land back, but he thinks indigenous people should have the national forest back, which is some weird ass like native, romanticism to think that, oh no, they could have the national parks back. That'll be nice. They'll appreciate that. So I call in and I debate them, and I only include this section because it's a longer debate, because it made me laugh, and I hope it makes y'all laugh, because the conversation's been all over the place, a little heavy, but just to highlight how devoted they are to Zionism. What is the first thing a Zionist does when you criticize the Zionist entity? They claim that you're anti-Semitic. So this is the second link.
I want to make it very clear.
Of like,
no.
Of being self-righteous indignation.
I'm not being.
Always.
No, dude. You in this conversation, listen, I get what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. You're saying that there must be a total overthrow that must take place, that all of the European implants that have come in and colonized this must be completely disempowered in that first instance, in setting up a new Palestine, let's call it, just for the sake of it. We don't know what the name of it would be, but let's just assume it's Palestine. And you're saying, and unless that happens, it is not a legitimate decolonization process. And I am conceding this point to you.
Yeah.
I don't know what else you want me to tell you. I happen to think.
Well, the issue is, why not promote that?
Because I think promoting that is a pipe dream.
Yep.
It is completely divorced of the reality that exists. And if you think millions of people are going to say, okay, we're not going to do that, then I honestly think that you are not in touch with reality. The theory that you can have may be correct, and I am conceding it. And if that makes me a liberal Zionist, because I have that position, I feel like relative to the company that you have put me in, I'm not terribly concerned about that. But I'm telling you that your position is, I think, completely fantastical. And I
of course you do. You're gone. You're a settler. Of course, you believe that it's an improbability, right? Everybody likes to reference like capitalism.
I don't think it's an improbability.
Capitalist realism.
No, I don't think it's an
improbability.
But
there is a settler realism. There's a settler realism as well, right? That you cannot perceive the fact that you will lose power. Right?
No. I can perceive.
Who's the we here? Actually, no. Actually, I want you to expand on the fact that you just brought up Norm Finkelstein and you gratuitously to talk about. And when you say we, who are you referring to when you're talking about Sam? Huh?
What do you mean? Settlers, Europeans.
Hold on.
You're talking about white people, or are you talking about Jewish people?
No.
Oh, there you go.
I mean,
white people. Why are you pulling this anti-Semitism thing? That even sounds pulling it.
Well, the shoe fits.
No, I think like
look, have some self-respect.
Listen, I think within the context of this country, but like why? Like I also think.
Thank you for understanding that.
No, I do. I do understand it. I also think the idea that the white Europe.
So immediately accuses me of being anti-Semitic for gratuitously bringing up Norm Finkelstein. Mind you, the reason I brought up Norm Finkelstein is because their producer Matt Leck always brings up Ilan Pappé, always brings up Jeff Halper. And he was asking me whether I had an issue with them. And I said, yes, I have an issue with them, Norm Finkelstein included, because these are liberal Zionists. They're critical of the Zionist entity, but they're still liberal Zionists. And it's also alarming that he always mentions them and not Palestinians, right? And so that's why she got upset that I mentioned Norm Finkelstein earlier. But it's just hilarious that immediately tries to accuse me of being anti-Semitic. And credit to Sam Seder, who is Jewish, immediately doesn't allow that to happen. And it's honestly kind of embarrassing for somebody to pull the quote unquote like race card on your behalf, right? Because it's very paternal, it's very condescending, and it's flat out disrespectful to do, right? But it did make me laugh that like immediately when questioned on their position, that they revert to the reactionary Zionist accusations of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there's some stuff in the chat I want to get to, so I don't want to belabor this point. But I think that, it's such an interesting so there is a very strong continuity, and I've talked about this, and I'm like, obviously different indigenous folks have different opinions about like what does decolonization look like and all of this, but I always think it's so interesting the emphasis that gets put on that from settlers or people who are like from European folks, broadly speaking, in all of these situations, right? Of like they always go to this weird like thing about people being like forced deportation and all of these things. And I mean, like I had a really good conversation again with the Good Shepherd Collective around Palestinian discussions around decolonization and all of this. And like there are very important points that come up, right? You talked about the land thing and like them saying, oh, you can't have this or that, right, because there's a theme park or there's this. Like part of what definitely comes up for one is land reform, right? Is land, the changing of land relations. And that is something that like Europeans are so opposed to historically, and obviously, I mean, like the way that they talk about Zimbabwe or the way that they talk about South Africa, when, for instance, there become discussions about land, right? And this was part of what Good Shepherd was saying is like, look, like a lot of the kind of the form that gets promoted in the West when we talk about, what could free Palestine look like is this idea of equal rights, equal citizenship, and dismantling of an apartheid structure. And they're like, that's not enough, right? The land was taken, right? We need to be able to get the land back that was taken. We need to be able to return to the villages that we lived in and all of these things, right? And then on the other part, which I think is even discussed less, which I mean, land is obviously like fundamental, but is just all of the capital accumulation that happened as a result of this process, right? So like what happens to the money that all you Zionists and, you know, the capitalists who have fed off of it from other parts of the world have extracted all the resources? Like this has to be a discussion as well, right? Which I mean, broadly speaking, is just a discussion of reparations, right? If we're talking about it in that sense, right? But I think that that's the unwillingness and the efforts that happen among a lot of people that are ostensibly on the left. And I mean, I always hate using that term specifically for people who are not anti-capitalist. So for me, I don't even know that I put platforms like the Majority Report on the left, even though most people do. But the there's so much resistance to even just having conversations about these things, and like all of these defenses that go up, you know, to demonize it when people have it and talk about, you know, start saying, you know, ad hominem attacks, right? Basically, oh, you're anti-Semitic, you're unrealistic, da 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 da. And it's like, I mean, to even have a discussion of what's realistic, we have to at least have a discussion about the totality of things, right? And about the positions that exist. Because if you talk to a lot of Palestinians, they also say, like, would you want to live next to these people after what they've done to us for the last, you know, 100+ years, right? And they'll also raise up, like, look, if there's a free Palestine, a lot of them are gonna leave, right? And so whether that's, you know, you could make these scare things about like forced relocation. Most of these Israelis are not going to want to stay in a place where they have to treat people in equal ways. And you know, that's part of why also there's an interesting, you know, discussion maybe to have about whether by saying, you know, equal rights and all of this, whether like that's the foot in the door to get to the thing, because like maybe if they actually got to that place, like so many people would leave that have been like, all right, but yeah.
So, and I'll be brief as well. Look, I'm not trying to speak over Palestinian voices. I'm just giving my honest, you know, opinion. Suggestion here is, I think at a minimum, I don't support this whole equal rights shit. Colonizers have no right to equal rights with Palestinians, with the people that they colonized, that they, you know, committed a genocide against. You don't get that reward, right? So at the very least, I think they shouldn't have say in the government at all for the same amount of time that the Settler Colonial Project existed, at the very least, right? I would say double that. But that is just, you know, where I'm coming from, seeing, you know, from my limited knowledge of colonization and what happens after. I think you need at least a few generations of, hey, if you want to stay here, cool. But guess what? You don't have a political say. You have no political say. Demonstrate that you're actually willing to live as part of the society. And not only that, guess what? If they do want to reestablish, you know, their homes, their villages, where whatever the case is, their cities, their towns, and you're living there, you're gonna have to fucking move. So that is forced relocation. But guess what? Forced relocation of who? A colonizer, an occupier, a settler. What the fuck is wrong with that? Like, I don't understand. Like, what grants them the magical right to maintain the land that they stole, especially when the people they stole it from are trying to reclaim it? And so again, like the Majority Report, if there's one thing I want to make sure everyone understands, they're Zionists, they're liberal Zionist propagandists, and the fact that they're glorified to the extent that they are shows how insidious white supremacy is normalized. And the fact that they pretend to be allies, despite literally saying, I don't think Israel should disappear, despite saying, you know, Israel has a right to exist because it does exist, that circular logic. What more do you need from these people? You know, I know you said there's some questions too that you wanted to get to. I don't know if we have time for it.
Yeah, there's just stuff in the chat, but yeah, I appreciate what you said there, and I don't disagree. Actually, I think that's a good position. All right, so first of all, Yeah, the YouTube live stream double format. I was trying it with this is something that's being promoted to us as streamers right now, is to do the portrait and landscape formats. People let me know in the content or in the comments of if that sucks or if it's a real pain in the butt, then I'll stop doing it. Also let me know if it's good. What's your take on Chapo?
You know what's funny? I have never listened to an episode of Chapo. And it's some things are just too white for me to engage with, and that's one of them. It's just too much. It's like watching Beverly Hills 90210. Like I can't relate to it. Watching Little House on the Prairie, there's no entry for me. Not only that, from my understanding, a couple of them have been exposed as fucking like creeps and pedos. So I never engaged with them. The name outright like made me realize what they're about, because that was a big like white hipster edgelord kind of like, what was it called, like the scumbag left or some shit, the dirtbag left or something like that, where it's like, oh
yeah, dirtbag left.
Yeah, we're leftists, but we use the N-word, and it's funny when we're racist. I'm like, all right. And you still see that weaponized bigotry, like with people like Kyle Kalinske, who think that it's okay to use racial slurs or to dename people who the left, disagrees with or whatnot. So yeah, fuck all those fools, bro. Like they're just, and the worst part is that they know better and they refuse to grow the fuck up and to hold themselves to a higher standard because they're fucking man children. White men specifically get to enjoy this arrested development. They're always children. Look at Grant Plantner. He didn't know any better. He was like 20 something when he got that tattoo. He's in his 40s and he still didn't get it removed until like a month ago. But it's the perpetual infantilization of white men, and Chapo for me is that. So fuck them too.
I have listened to like one preview or something like that, but I also have never gotten into it. All right, I appreciate Carlos Heavy. I used to watch a lot of these white leftists like Hasan, Sam Seder, and never realized how liberal and how Zionist they are. Now they are trying to defend a neo-Nazi. Deculturation always finds receipts. Shout out to Chidimata. Just saw a photo. This is of Mamdani and Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, I saw that. People were like, what was it? It was something. What did they say? We're taking on the oligarchy or the cat. I don't remember. It was, yeah. Appears all Mamdani has said about Venezuela is that Maduro is a dictator as the U.S. rolls up with half the Navy. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the timing on that is just freaking vile as fuck. Like,
and I feel a personal responsibility to cover fucking Jorge Ramos and his daughter. And I'm never going to say her name because Nepo fucking kids don't deserve to be recognized. But yeah, no, that's where it happened. And he called it the Miami baptism, to denounce Maduro, to denounce Cuba in general. Because for them, the ghost of Fidel is still running Cuba, in case nobody knows. That's how fucking brain rot these people are. So you have to denounce it. They don't even bother to mention who's running it now. So yeah, Mamdani saying that he's not just aligning and collaborating with Zionists, but he's also contributing to the U.S. empire and that propaganda. And again, so all these people, these Bernie Sanders acolytes, they're national socialists. That's what they are. They're democratic socialists is bullshit. They're national socialists. Bernie was just on a podcast congratulating Donald Trump for his crackdown on the border, and he claimed that it's not that difficult to do, and that Biden and none of his predecessors have done it. Biden was proposing a bill so reactionary that Lindsey Graham, a fucking grand wizard of the Klan, was telling his peers, we have to vote for this. And it was only Donald Trump that prevented it. It was only Donald Trump's pursuit for power and to make it part of his campaign that prevented it. And we've seen a couple of times where the Republican Party's desire for power has prevented the Democratic Party from going further and further to the right. Like they're both fighting to be further right. It's quite embarrassing. So for Bernie to say that on Tim Dillon's podcast, but to say that, to praise Donald Trump while ICE is kidnapping people off the streets, he's a national socialist. But once you realize that he's a Zionist and that Zionism is white supremacy, it's no surprise why he glorifies Donald Trump. It's no surprise why suddenly the Bernie Sanders acolytes, Crystal Ball, Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland, Hasan Piker, are defending a neo-Nazi. it's unsurprising once you connect that shit.
I think I know who this is. Shout out to David Chavez. That interview was brutal, but as Jared Ball said in the interview, he doesn't study any radical history or even cared about Black radical scholarship, that he has been critiquing liberal identity politics. That has been critiquing liberal identity politics, right? Yeah, absolutely. And then I think this was in the same interview. I mean, I'm sure it's not the only time that he's just let the N word fly, but I think he did let it fly a few times on Black liberation media, just for, I don't know.
Well, all these white leftists were defending him using the Yiddish N word that he called I forget that Zionist that he used to be like a communist, he used to be like a Maoist, and now he's a full on Zionist on mainstream media. I forget his name, but yeah, just straight up using the Yiddish N word.
Oh, I was gonna say that could apply to a few people. I mean, Van Jones is definitely
Van Jones. That's what it was. Yeah. He called Van Jones like a pimp and all this stuff like that. It's weird, but yeah, the way he fetishizes Black women, he's done it to Brianna Joy Gray. He did it to Angela Davis in that interview with Dr. Ball. He's just a fucking creep through and through. I'm glad that he has a miserable fucking life. I'm glad that he hates his life. You could tell he hates his life. So yeah, fuck Norm. Yeah, I'm glad he didn't get tenured.
Just to clarify, we are talking about Norm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this point is interesting. I mean, I don't disagree, right? Like we could have a better term. It's the term that I see used most often for the phenomenon that we're describing, and we're not trying to say that I would agree that, well, actually, here's my, intend to agree, but I also think that people have a bad understanding of liberalism and think that liberal means something positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or think that liberal means that, I mean, there is a contradiction, I think, in the idea of liberal Zionism, right? Because but you could have a liberal Zionism because it would mean exactly kind of what we're talking about, of kind of like an equal rights framework within Zionism, right? So a non-apartheid Zionism. Whether that would be sustainable or not is a sort of different question, but it theoretically is a possibility, and it's something that people are advocating for, right?
Yeah.
And I think that just like liberalism within the United States, doesn't deal with the issue, doesn't deal with settler colonialism, doesn't deal with the afterlives of slavery and all of these other things, and doesn't deal with decolonization, and certainly doesn't deal with imperialism and the United States being the imperial hegemon, and is not interested in any of those conversations ultimately. That's what we're talking about, right? So it's like, to say, I get the impulse, because part of what they're saying is it's like saying liberal fascism, right? And it's like, yeah, that is kind of what it's like saying,
Well, my frustration with that, and look, if you don't want to have a nuanced conversation, that's fine. Like, you don't have to engage in a nuanced conversation. You could just, say fuck it all. That's perfectly fine. However, if you're going to engage in critique and criticism, you have to be nuanced, because this is where these people hide. We literally saw Bernie Sanders say he's not even a Zionist anymore, right? That doesn't identify with that. So it requires a nuanced conversation. I understand the frustration behind it, but at the same time, do you consider, if somebody calls you a liberal, you're insulted, or you should be. My coworkers, my coach, they know that they want to fucking troll me, if they want to like rage bait me to call me a liberal, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're correct. It's just a failure, or accepting the propaganda that the liberal label has gained, when in reality, should we not talk about spiritual Zionism? Because I think that's an important conversation as well, because that's often an excuse heard, right?
Yeah.
And so what's the point of saying there's no such thing as spiritual Zionism? It's just Zionism. It's like, well, yeah, but we're talking about a specific branch of Zionism. And if you don't want to engage with it, that's perfectly fine. I understand where you're coming from. But at the same time, don't get upset when other people are trying to have a more nuanced conversation about it, because we're not legitimizing anything, but we're just, again, being detailed in our critique. But yeah.
Right on. Appreciate you. I do have to hop off and go grab one of my sons, but I couple last comments. First of all, Carlos, really appreciate this conversation. I thought it was great and appreciate the work you're doing. I hope you stick with it. I also think you should get over any feelings that you have about asking people to support your Patreon for the work that you do, because it is valuable and you are putting hours and hours of work into it. And anybody, I mean, first of all, you're not going to make that much money doing it, and neither do I. And so it's labor, right? And people appreciate it and benefit from it. Thank you for the super chat. It was, I thought, all of those things, and yes, free Palestine.
Always.
So yeah, I need to catch up on this, and also Two Black and I have something in the works as a part of this series. Shout out to Rasul Moat as well, who I know has been involved in this. But yeah, I'm sure it's excellent, as is all of their work. I don't think the reference when there's often a call for a Palestinian Mandela. I know that Marwan Barghouti is sometimes referred to as the Palestinian Mandela, but I don't think your comment, unless I misinterpret it, was you specifically like referencing that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
And yeah, some people had talked about some weird stuff with Mark Fisher. Again, RIP, but I guess I haven't delved that deeply into him as a person. So if he did fucked up shit himself, then we don't excuse that either.
Well, that's why Michael Brooks is overrated, man. Like, not just him, but his how he worshipped Adolf Reed. You notice a lot of white leftists worship Adolf Reed, and it's there was a lot of signs that he was also going to go into the North Eco scene, anti-woke route. I'm just glad that whatever legacy he did leave behind, that his peers like Anna Kasparian, Sam Seder are taking a daily piss on it, because it saves me the effort.
Right on, man. All right. Remind folks what days you stream again.
Yeah, on Deculturation, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. I was going to stream after this, but I need to really work on that Grand Platinum video. I just posted the trailer, the Patreon. It's up now. I think the hardest part was coming up with the tiers, but I think people look at the tiers, they'll appreciate the names: Apolitical, Progressive, Radlib, and Coffee Shop Revolutionary are all on there. I think it's funny, man. But yeah, I appreciate you reaching out. It really does mean a lot. Like I said, Millennials Are Killing Capitalism, Why Is the Dome TV are my go-to for great interviews. And I appreciate the work that you do. And hopefully I could bug you and hop on to anything doing with the Coen brothers or anything else, really. I enjoy the work you do and appreciate the time and space.
Yeah, man, I would love to have you back on. We can do some more stuff. This was really good. And yeah, again, appreciation for what you do. I hope people, if they are not subscribed, there's links in the show description. Subscribe to the channels. And yeah, man, this was great. Thank you.
All right. Peace.
Peace.